G'day mate, 40 here. I'm telling you about this great new book, Britain at Bay. The epic story of the Second World War, 1938 to 1941, is by history professor Alan Allport. I'll read a little bit from this book before we get on to the news of the day. By the 1930s, the British were heavily invested in the little man conception of themselves. Key to this was the idea of their nation as a uniquely gentle, domesticated and consensual place, a peaceable kingdom, which belligerence was rare, moderation the norm, and reasonableness celebrated. So this is the Britain of the 1930s. Over the past few days, I've shown you some highlights from the Netflix documentary The House of Windsor, where the British royal family felt so insecure during World War I about their German origins that they took extreme steps to disassociate themselves from all things German and to fully embrace all things British. The Broadgate bombing, this was an IRA bombing in 1938, represented everything that was supposedly inimical to British civilization in the 1930s, a resort to terror rather than persuasion, an indifference to the suffering of innocents, a contempt for the constitutional process. So the British in the 1930s was heavily invested in this idea that their people, their nation, was uniquely gentle, domesticated, and consensual, that they were believers in constitutional democracy, right? So we can have all sorts of conceptions about ourselves as gentle and domesticated and consensual and constitutional, and circumstances change and national character can change just like that. Britain, according to the little man view of the world, was an offshore haven of tranquility, mercifully detached by geography from the cruel and quarrelsome mainland of Europe. So geography has a tremendous effect on people, right? You can afford a lot more civil liberty when you're an island nation, or when you're the United States, where you don't have any powerful enemies on your doorstep. The United States is protected by two huge moats, the Atlantic Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and then it's got these puny powers above and below it in Canada and Mexico. All right, no threats, so you can afford a lot more liberty to your citizens. Meanwhile, people in Europe, they often live generations, no more than, say, 5-10 miles apart. So they have much stronger attachment to a particular place. So it's not just race that influences people. It's not just DNA. It's not just genetics. It's also geography. The civil liberties that you can afford when you're an island nation or when you're not surrounded by enemies are very different from the civil liberties that you can afford when you're a nation state such as Germany, which has long been completely surrounded by enemies. Therefore, Germany has tended much more towards totalitarian solutions because its geographic situation is so much more dire. Australia, New Zealand, they were hardly hit by the Spanish flu in 1918, very lightly touched by COVID in 2020. So they are afforded all sorts of luxuries that other nations cannot, primarily as a result of geography. The techniques of political terror common on the continent, pogroms, purges, assassinations, were unknown on the English-speaking side of the channel. And why were they unknown? In large part because England, being an island, could simply afford more liberties, could afford to dole out more freedoms to its citizens because its survival was not as at stake as, say, a nation state such as France or Germany or Poland or Czechoslovakia. Our methods, the military commentator J.F.C. Fuller pointed out, are not of the stiletto, the bomb, and the cup of bad coffee. Thinking of the collapse of parliamentary democracy across Europe in 1934, historian J.E. Neal sought consolation in his own nation's exceptionalism. We may thank God, he said, we are not as other men are. Well, guess what? They are as other men are. They're just in a different circumstance. So Americans, the British, and other nations have long thought of themselves as separate from the rest of humanity and superior to the rest of humanity. And it's a lot easier to maintain these delusions when you're protected by the ocean, when you don't have any strong, powerful enemies on your doorstep. The Great Britain of the 1930s had a stable and moderate political system, no small thing in an age of totalitarianism. So why was Britain able to have a stable and moderate political system? large part, it was a result of the people who inhabited Britain. The Anglo-Saxons had developed a method of government over about 1,000 years that was relatively stable and moderate. So part of it was the DNA of the people, part of it was the culture and history of the people, and then another large part was the geography of the people. Britain's three main political parties all sought to govern from the center rather than from the margins. They did not challenge the validity of election results, even in defeat. Well, in the United States in 2020, why do we have so many on the Republican side challenging the result of elections? Because they feel that circumstances have grown so dire that America as they know it will cease to exist with a Joe Biden presidency. So people are much more willing to accept things when their very survival is not threatened. Extremists who rejected this constitutional order, like the communists and the black shirts, the fascists, could boast noisy antics which got a lot of press attention, a handful of well-placed sympathizers, but so far as the masses were concerned, they never occupied anything more than a tiny and contemptible niche in political life. So this is very different from the situation in Germany in the early 1930s, where Germany was going to go totalitarian either to the right or the left. By the early 1930s, Germany was either going to become a totalitarian communist power or a totalitarian fascist power. Its circumstances did not allow for this kind of equanimity and just simple acceptance of election results. By the late 1930s, most Britons had come to terms with the idea that the Irish were fundamentally different people from themselves. And how did they come to terms with this idea? Because of experience with the Irish. The Irish poured into Great Britain, and so the British had voluminous experience with the Irish, and then they realized that the Irish were very different. So you'll see that white Americans who live around a substantial number of black Americans are far less liberal in their views on race than white Americans who live largely separate lives from black Americans. So interpersonal experience will shape how one group thinks about an outgroup. For example, in Australia, there's virtually no anti-Semitism except for two cities, Sydney and Melbourne, where Australians are most likely to have contact with Jews. But the rest of Australia, there are very few Jews, and as a consequence, there's very little anti-Semitism. The Irish, it was whispered in Britain, were constitutionally inclined to violence. Well, why did so many people think that? Because the Irish had, compared to the English, astronomical crime rates, including astronomical violent crime rates. It took about a century to assimilate Irish immigrants to the United States. Their fecundity and fecklessness were said to be at odds with sober Anglo-Saxon values. They sponged off British taxpayers by demanding public assistance. It has been truly said that Ireland has discovered how to make England pay for its poor, the Times suggested Archley in 1936. Catholics' real loyalty was surely to Rome rather than to the British crown. The Irish spoke differently, they dressed differently, they behaved differently. Many English people in the 1930s continued to think of the Irish deep down as duplicitous peasants. So when you dress differently from everyone else, when you speak differently from everyone else, when you behave differently from the majority, when you commit high rates of crime, particularly violent crime, and when you take up disproportionate amounts of social welfare spending, then it would be weird if the majority did not look upon you with skepticism. The Britain that went to war in 1939 was a much more unified country than it is today. The Second World War would strengthen its unities further still. It is natural, 80 years later, to feel pangs of nostalgia about such cohesion. It is understandable to wonder where the self-confidence and sense of place that the British once seemed to possess has gone. But national unity came at a price. Creating a sense of inclusiveness for the many meant excluding the few. So yes, you like national unity, right? Are we going to all unite around, come together around this new Biden administration? What coming together means is that the people in power expect everyone else to come together to their values, to their way of looking at the world. So when Britain was united in World War II, that meant that it was less acceptable to have outgroups behaved, dressed, spoke, and conducted themselves differently from the majority. So creating a sense of inclusiveness for the many will always mean excluding the few. This is not something that's unique to Great Britain. It's not unique to Japan or to America. All right, these are universal maxims. So the Irish still not assimilated in Scotland. So if Colin is around, I will send him an invite. But first, let me play you a little clip here from Truth is the Only Client, the official investigation of the murder of John F. Kennedy. New documentary available on YouTube.
The Kennedy assassination is the most important murder case in world history.
It's quite understandable, I think, that there should be, it should be so hard to accept the assassination as the work of one mixed up, limited power, strange young man. It's not Shakespearean. It doesn't fit.
You fire that rifle? That dispatch a few people have been given, but I emphatically deny these charges.
There are two realities in this case. One reality is that at its core, this is a simple case. But there's another reality here. Because of the unceasing and fanatical obsession of thousands of Warren Commission critics and conspiracy theorists, it's now the most complex murder case by far in world history. Nothing even remotely comes close.
You have anything to say in your defense? There's a shot. Ramzpaul has been shot. Holy mackerel.
The man whom the commission concluded killed the president was himself killed in the Dallas police station. Now that must strike people as impossible.
Hi, my name is Brendan Sheehan. I'm a judge in Cuyahoga County Common.
Okay, so that's just a brief excerpt from this new documentary on the JFK assassination. All right, Travis LeBlanc writes an article here, the Million Groyper March. And he showed up in Washington, D.C. 10 days ago for the MAGA march. Says he notices the Proud Boys in D.C. seemed a lot older than I remembered. The few Proud Boys meetups I'd previously gone to, the crowd seemed mostly late millennial with maybe some early Zoomers. However, the Proud Boys I saw at the Million MAGA march seemed to skew older, mostly early millennials, quite a few Generation X, Generation Y types. I think it may be that older people are much more likely to have the money to travel to D.C. Perhaps many of the younger Proud Boys defected to the alt-right circa 2016, 2017. Proud Boys now seem less hipsterish and more Chad. Once the Proud Boys got a reputation for street action and confrontation with Antifa, that attracted a new type of person. People in the distant right give the Proud Boys grief for being civic nationalist cucks. Ideologically, they leave much to be desired, and yet there's a lot to like about the Proud Boys. They place a high value on masculinity, and their sense of brotherhood is admirable. They are a tight-knit group. As we stood there, the Proud Boys would occasionally break out into spontaneous chants of 4 more years and F Antifa. Their spirits were high and morale off the charts. Proud Boys are certainly having a moment right now. They recently got a semi-endorsement in an internationally televised live presidential debate where Donald Trump told them, Proud Boys, stand back and stand by. That the Proud Boys are not explicitly white nationalists gives them enough plausible deniability that they can go out in public and confront Antifa in ways that white nationalists cannot. The Proud Boys went full white nationalists, the establishment would start throwing these guys 30-year prison sentences for jaywalking. And Travis writes, if I weren't a believer in physiognomy before reaching Freedom Plaza in Washington, D.C., I was soon afterward. White liberals and white conservatives just look different. They look about as different from each other as Italians and Germans do. You occasionally meet someone who could pass for the other, but you'll guess right over 90% of the time. That matches with my life experience. Someone who has spent the last several years in one of the most liberal cities in America, that's something that stood out to me, just how different conservatives look. Part of it may be differences in fashion and diet. Maybe with a different haircut, clothes, and a vegan diet, some of these people might look more liberal. I don't know. These people just look conservative. And there's been much talk of Trump's uncharacteristic for Republican popularity among people of color, particularly blacks and Hispanics. Many conservatives hail this as evidence that blacks are finally beginning to see the wisdom of conservatism and that blacks are assimilating into white culture. Others say the Republicans have become the true party of inclusivity. Travis says, I think Trump's popularity with these groups has to do mostly with Trump's personality and little else. Blacks dig alpha behavior and an effortlessly cool, I don't give an F attitude regardless of race. Just look at black reverence for the movie Scarface. Hispanics, like all Latino people, have a soft spot for strong men. I doubt that someone like Nikki Haley or Jeb Bush could inspire the same level of passion from these groups. I doubt even an ideological Trumpian like Tucker Carlson could. Whatever the cause, Trump's support among minorities is a very real thing. They appear to be some of Trump's most passionate supporters. People of color were among the first to get to the Million MAGA march and among the last to leave. There's an extremely popular genre of YouTube videos, black people reacting to white music, usually hard rock, classic rock, and heavy metal. They almost always react positively with stereotypically black enthusiasm. These videos get millions of views. There is a huge demand from white people to have their taste in music blessed by black people. And then we had Lady MAGA showing up at the march, and he was surrounded by a phalanx of fag hags clamoring to have their picture taken with him. Conservative women were utterly fascinated by Lady MAGA. That someone could be both a drag queen and a Trump supporter completely blew their minds. Most of the base black guys I encountered seemed like genuinely nice, sincere people. One of the ways conformity is enforced is by threatening social isolation. The existence of these sorts of subcultures undermines the power of that threat. Yeah, you can make me persona non grata in 90% of society, but there's still that 10% of people who will think I'm cool. Some people will make the cost-benefit analysis and decide that they'd rather be themselves within a tiny subculture than live in a wider society. So let me play a little bit more from this new documentary on the JFK assassination.
The young, liberal, charismatic candidate winning a close election and coming into an administration with a commitment to talent, meritocracy, meeting the needs of the country, whether they be foreign or domestic.
We shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe, to assure the survival and the success of liberty.
There was tremendous optimism at the time of President Kennedy's inauguration, but it was the height of the Cold War, and the threat of nuclear war was very high. In 1959, off the coast of Miami, Florida, on the island of Cuba, Fidel Castro overthrew Cuban President Fulgencio Batista. When Castro formed a relationship with the Soviet Union, tensions reached a high point. Both President Eisenhower and the newly elected President Kennedy supported a CIA plan to aid a dissident militia of anti-Castro Cubans to invade the island and overthrow Castro. Known as the Bay of Pigs invasion, it was a disaster for the dissidents and an embarrassment for the United States. And only a year and a half later, when Soviet missiles were discovered being assembled on the island, the Cuban Missile Crisis brought us to the brink of nuclear war with the Soviet Union.
Shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
At the same time, tensions around demands for civil rights for African Americans were at a boiling point. This was the environment surrounding President Kennedy's murder.
The country was aware that this was a national disaster that we were facing here. If there was a conspiracy, everybody had to find that out.
When a major political assassination occurs, it's almost automatic that people think about a political motivation for it.
Here is a bulletin. President Kennedy has been shot and seriously wounded.
Well, let me kind of give you my first reaction when I heard that the president had been shot, which was that this was a Southern segregationist that was the shooter. And then, of course, it very quickly turned out that it wasn't a Southern segregationist. In fact, it was somebody from the completely opposite end of the political spectrum, a Marxist. And then I thought this was a frame-up. This was the FBI framing somebody that they, as a part of a group that they've been out to get for decades. So when I got to Washington, I certainly came with a lot of skepticism.
There was a concern after the assassination, immediately after the assassination, both in the federal government and in the Soviet Union, as to whether Johnson would think they did it, that all of a sudden we would exchange nuclear weapons and the whole world would end in the World War III with bombings everywhere, nuclear weapons. And so to the degree that the question was, did the Soviet Union have a hand in what Oswald did in Dallas? That's scary.
Okay, back to Travis's article here on the Million MAGA march 9 days ago. When Nick Fuentes finally arrived on the scene, it was like something out of Hard Day's Night. The gropers erupted in jubilation. The kid's a rock star. Some effort, Fuentes was able to wade through the throngs of his worshipful supporters and make his way to the makeshift stage that had been commandeered for him by the gropers and begin testifying. As I was watching Fuentes speak, a couple of young girls walked by. The pretty of the two stopped and her eyes lit up as they looked over to the groper stage. "Is that?" I told her. "That's Nick Fuentes." The pretty girl's friend said, "Oh, we don't want that." The friend then grabbed the pretty girl's arm and led her away. I guess she was not a fan of Cookie Monster jokes. Other people from America First appeared on stage, including Jake Lloyd, Vincent James, Steve Franson, and Jaden McNeil. Then Baked Alaska staged one of the most remarkable and unlikely comebacks in the history of e-celebrity.
And Johnson was scared after the assassination. He was afraid that there were going to be additional shootings, and he was going to be one of them, with good reason. So what an effort was made to do is to settle that down. There were bombers in the air, literally sack bombers in the air, waiting to be told whether to go to Russia or not. And that's not a good thing. So let's settle it all down. And they did settle it all down. We didn't have World War III.
Okay, so back to Travis's article on the Million MAGA march. So Baked Alaska is like Jason from the Friday the 13th movies. You see him get killed over and over, but then he just keeps coming back over and over. You watch his e-celebrity go up in flames, but then a year later, you find out that they're coming out with the Baked Alaska Part 8, and you think, wait, he's back? No way. How is he back? How is that even possible? I saw him die in a fiery explosion that surely no one could walk away from. The end credits started rolling. That's supposed to be the end. How is that not the end? How is he back? I thought he was done after the whole Sweet Aaron Ice Poseidon thing, when he attempted to rebrand from an alt-right personality to a normie in real-life streamer. I thought that controversy would ruin him. Then later, Porcelain made a documentary where he absolutely bodied Baked Alaska. The Irony Bros were nice enough to let him join their crew, but then his psychotic alt-right girlfriend started reporting them to Antifa. Few people have the kind of cringe rap sheet that Baked Alaska has. Literally, the guy's Kiwi Farms page is longer than War and Peace. There are people who have become white nationalists. There are people who have become white nationalists who then later publicly disavowed white nationalism. Baked Alaska might be the first person to become a white nationalist when the alt-right got hot, publicly disavow white nationalism after Christchurch, and then publicly undisavow white nationalism once Nick Fuentes got hot. Closest example might be David Cole, who disavowed and then undisavowed his work in Holocaust revisionism, but Cole at least had the excuse of the Jewish Defense League putting a $25,000 bounty on his head. But I'll be damned if Baked Alaska is not more popular now than he was when he was the #2 internet blood sports channel behind Warski Live. His in-real-life streams have been getting over 3,000 live viewers, which makes him the third biggest streamer on D-Live behind Fuentes and Owen Benjamin. Throughout all of his controversies, Nick Fuentes has remained stubbornly loyal to Baked Alaska in ways that bewildered even some of Fuentes' most ardent plan trusters. Nothing else that speaks to Fuentes' loyalty as a friend that he'd stick up for Baked Alaska even when it was extremely uncool to do so. The thing about purity and why it is not very impressive is that you don't have to do anything to be pure. Being effective requires some combination of talent, skill, hard work, and patience. Being pure, on the other hand, is simply a matter of ticking boxes. People who don't do anything for the movement and people who are not effective at what they do are always going to place a high value on purity because it's an easy metric for them to score high in. Useless people always push for more purity. Most purity spiralers are anonymous. Not only do they not have to do anything to be pure, they don't even have to prove that they actually live up to their own ideals. We're just supposed to take on blind faith that they are not having gay interracial orgies at their home every weekend while they dissect the personal lives of people who actually do stuff. Now, if Nick Fuentes was to disappear next week, I don't think there's anyone within the American First scene who could step in and do what Nick Fuentes does. With the Groypers, it is all based on Nick. He is the president and the Supreme Court. What he says is law. There are smart guys in the America First scene like Vincent James. There are funny guys in the American First scene like Beardson Beardley, but Nick is the complete package. Nick is irreplaceable to his movement. He has said that he does not plan to do his show forever. The rate he is going, he probably will be caught up to the big leagues of either TV or government at something, and he'll have to find himself a protege to mold into a potential successor. There are upsides to the Groypers being a court of Nick. There are a lot of mistakes that I trust Nick not to make. He does not drink. He does not use drugs. He does not chase girls. He does not go on drunken rants about retaking Constantinople.
And again, I will make no bones about it. I truly despise the Turks. I absolutely would support a unified European effort to take back that in Eurasia entirely. And whatever happens to the Turks, I don't give a shit. I don't care about them. They're ugly and just appalling people who have no culture. I've visited Turkey. I had been there and I began to just despise those people. We have this beautiful, like Hagia Sophia and so on. It's imprisoned with this disgusting mosque, just this repulsive religion of Islam. It is a appalling place. It is an occupied territory. We should just take it from them. I don't give a flying fuck about the destiny of the Turkish people. We should rip Constantinople, entire Eurasia from them. We should throw every Turk into the ocean. I do not care about them. We should reestablish Byzantium. That is the absolute crown jewel of our civilization. That is just as important as Rome. That is just as important as Germany. That is just as important as France, London. That is our land. The white race should unify. I will only be satisfied. I will only know that the white race is back, that we are once again a powerful people when we unify and take back all of Eurasia. When I just think about the fact that Turks are occupying that land, that they have surrounded one of the great monuments of our civilization with these stupid minarets, and there's all this shit. It just makes me entirely angry.
Okay, that's Richard Spencer going off on Turkey. Okay, so you can trust Nick not to go on drunken rants about retaking Constantinople. I trust Nick not to upload videos of himself crying.
Oh. Uh-oh.
Okay, so I gotta play some of this. Okay, so I'm looking at Godwin podcast right now, and he tweets, guys, listen, for just $5 a month, if you become a Patreon supporter, you can participate in my secret YouTube streams, either from the chat box or by joining me on video. Videos remain private, secret taboo topics, just $5 a month, guys. Support the Godwin podcast on Patreon, and you can participate in his secret YouTube streams. Videos remain private, and there are secret taboo topics. Okay, so you can trust Nick not to go on drunken rants about retaking Constantinople. You can trust Nick not to upload videos of himself crying. I trust Nick not to allow himself to be photographed giving Nazi salutes. I trust Nick not to make up stories about being a war hero. I trust Nick not to have sex with Jaden McNeil's girlfriend and then start strangling him in a trailer park. Back in the alt-right days, there are about a dozen high-profile figures you had to constantly worry about. Please don't embarrass us. Please don't embarrass us. Please don't embarrass us. With the Groypers, you really only need to worry about one person. And the fact is that Nick Fuentes does not make many unforced errors. Second, because there is no dispute as to who is in charge, you don't see the same kinds of ego crashing and jockeying for status among the Groypers that you saw in the alt-right. Infighting is virtually non-existent within the Groyper movement. The rest of the extended America First crew seem perfectly happy to simply ride Nick Fuentes' coattails. Right, Truth is the Only Client, the official investigation of the murder of John F. Kennedy, new documentary. Conspiracy theories arise.
There is something about the community interest in this that bespeaks that affection and lost aspirations of the early 1960s. And it comes from people, for the most part, who have been disappointed time and time again by the federal government's addressing social or economic ills in our society as they've emerged time over time.
Suspicions of a possible conspiracy and speculation about the culprits began even before the commission began its work. It became the lasting impression of the assassination since then. Former Charles Manson prosecutor Vincent Bugliosi first studied this case when preparing for an unscripted mock trial of Oswald in 1986.
In the brief time I have to address you in this historic trial, I want to point out what must already be obvious to you, that Lee Harvey Oswald and Lee Harvey Oswald alone is responsible for the assassination of President John F. Kennedy.
Most Americans believe that the Kennedy assassination is still unsolved. The reality is that this case was solved by the Warren Commission when they issued their report on September the 24th, 1964. And their findings were that Oswald killed Kennedy and acted alone. And since that time, over 50 years ago, no credible evidence has surfaced which would alter the fundamental findings of the Warren Commission.
Okay, and there's a documentary that came out last year called All the Rage, Saved by Sarno. This is a documentary about the late, great Dr. John Sarno, the healer of back pain.
You might as well do a fruit salad, yes or no?
No, thank you. No, I mean, I will in a minute, yes.
All right.
No, I do. I just... Yeah.
The filmmaker Billy Wilder once said, if you have a problem in the third act, the real problem is in the first act.
I think I prefer the fighting.
the same can be said of life. Dr. John Sarno believes that much of the back pain that adults experience has its genesis in repressed emotions from childhood.
Okay. Let me open it, please.
When I was a kid, my parents had a tumultuous relationship. They could be loving and affectionate with each other, but they also fought a lot. If Dad were here, he would have screamed at me. He would never let me film him at all.
Exactly.
I remember waking up one time in the second grade and hearing what I thought was an argument. It turned out that it was my mom calling an ambulance. My dad had an ulcer, and that morning he was really sick and losing a lot of blood. My mom was panicking. My twin brother and I somehow got ourselves ready for school, and we headed for the bus. I do recall that as my brother and I walked to the bus stop, we saw an ambulance pull into the wrong driveway, and we had to point them in the right direction. I think my father was in the hospital for about a week, and shortly after he recovered, he began to have a series of pain problems that plagued him for years. My parents never talked to me too much about their childhoods, and I don't have the clearest memories of my own. But when I started to get back pain, I paid attention to both Billy Wilder and Dr. Sarno in order to change the direction of my story.
4 reasons the stay-at-home economy is here to stay. Even after a COVID-19 vaccine, changes to how we shop, dine, work out, and entertain ourselves are likely to endure.
It's the Wall Street Journal.
By Christopher Mims. November 21, 2020, 12 a.m. Eastern Time. Technology has helped make life tolerable in the pandemic. And whenever it becomes normal again to leave the house for work, school, and shopping, we won't be going back to the way it was. What were conveniences before the pandemic now seem necessities that we're unlikely to give up even after there's widespread immunity to the coronavirus. And there are a number of reasons this new stay-at-home economy will likely be an important part of the new normal. First, companies have made huge investments in the infrastructure needed to deliver goods and services to our homes quickly and efficiently, which means those products are now easier to use and often less expensive. Second, families have also invested in the services and gadgets to keep their members safe and sated while sheltering in place. Third, our habits have changed. Many people have gotten over the hump of adopting new technologies earlier than they otherwise might have. And finally, hundreds of thousands of Americans who lost traditional jobs in retail and service, on showroom floors and inside restaurants, have found new ones working in online order fulfillment and delivery. Even those who retained their jobs are seeing their roles shift to address these new conduits for economic activity. It's no wonder Fed Chairman Jerome Powell said on Tuesday, "We're not going back to the same economy, we're recovering, but to a different economy." You don't have to look beyond the behemoth of Amazon for an example of a company betting that the stay-at-home economy will last. It spent $30 billion on capital expenditures in the first 9 months of 2020, much of it for its e-commerce business. Just about every other company that competes with Amazon has made its own investments to handle the pandemic surge of demand. Walmart, Target, and major grocery chains have all doubled down on using their stores as fulfillment centers in which deliveries can be packed up and sent out. Netflix, Disney, and other purveyors of streamed entertainment have added not just subscribers, but also deals for the IT infrastructure and content required to keep them around. Delivery platforms such as DoorDash and Uber have spent heavily on sales and marketing, both to acquire new restaurants for their platforms and to bring in more customers. Chipotle, which partnered with DoorDash, has seen demand for at-home consumption explode. Delivery and other digital orders, which include those made on its app and picked up in the restaurant, now make up about 50% of its revenue, says Kurt Garner, Chief Technology Officer.
Okay, important article here in the Wall Street Journal. 4 reasons the stay-at-home economy is here to stay, even after a COVID-19 vaccine. Changes to how we shop, how we dine, how we work out, and how we entertain ourselves are likely to endure. Mediaite reports Fox News identity crisis, Indulge Trump's election conspiracy, or reject it and watch its audience flee. Viewers of Fox News can be forgiven if they are confused about the results of the 2020 election. The reason for their confusion is less defensible. Fox News has projected Joe Biden to have won the election. Well, its news division has. Simultaneously, the network's top-rated opinion hosts have continued to entertain the increasingly loony conspiracy theory that the election was stolen from Trump through widespread voter fraud. They've been careful in their words, but the near constant amplification of baseless allegations of a rigged or stolen election has lent credibility to the InfoWar-esque conspiracy theories being touted by Trump. Same theories mocked behind closed doors are being laughed out of courtrooms. The growing disconnect between the two sides of Fox News programming reveals its current identity crisis, raises a question about their immediate future. Do they want to be a news outlet where facts, as disappointing as they may be, are paramount? An information entertainment company that today solely acts as cheerleaders for the outgoing President Donald Trump. This dissonance was neatly illustrated last weekend when Maria Bartiromo, Fox News anchor and ardent Trump booster, had just given the platform of a Sunday morning show to Trump lawyers Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell. Both laid out wild and unproven conspiracy theories and claimed that Trump was the rightful winner of the election. Bartiromo seemed pleased to hear the news and never once challenged her guests on their claims, simply accepting their claim that they had evidence and that was evidence enough. But just an hour later, Fox News news reporter Eric Shawn filed a thorough report that effectively debunked every single claim that had been presented as real on Bartiromo's show. It was yet another look at Fox News schizophrenia. Viewers who watched both segments surely endured intense whiplash. So, yeah, there is this kind of mixed quality on Fox News right now, or the opinion shows amplifying claims of voter fraud, but the news division is showing something quite different. So here is Eric Shawn.
Rigged election? Well, your own government, election officials across the country, and voting experts say it's not true. Baseless claims that are inflammatory, designed to undermine your faith in American democracy. Here's the chairman of the federal agency, the U.S. Election Assistance Commission, Ben Hovland.
The reality is this was the most secure election we've ever had, and it was one of the most well-run elections we've ever had. And this is about facts. This is about truth. This is about respecting our democracy, respecting our elections, and focusing on what has really occurred. The American people made their voice heard. And when we spread conspiracy theories, when we don't back that up with facts, it has an impact.
Now, as for the president's claim that Republican observers were blocked from watching hundreds of thousands of votes being counted in Democratic-leaning Philadelphia, well, in case you missed it, here's the top Republican election official in Philadelphia, Philadelphia City Commissioner Al Schmidt, on that with me on Thursday. The president says observers were not allowed in the counting rooms. Is that true?
That's totally untrue.
The president says, quote, bad things happened that our observers were not allowed to see. Is that true?
Absolutely not.
Have you seen any evidence of voter fraud here?
I have not.
And how about the allegations about Dominion voting systems, that they supposedly changed Trump votes to Biden votes? Well, here's part of the company's answer to that allegation. Quote, vote deletion, switching assertions are completely false. Dominion is a nonpartisan U.S. company. Dominion has no ownership relationships with the Pelosi family, Feinstein family, Clinton Global Initiative, Smartmatic, Skytho, or any ties to Venezuela. Dominion works with all U.S. political parties. You know, prosecutors say that any voter or election fraud allegation will be thoroughly investigated. And if the fix were in, if there was wrongdoing, we will know about it. But election officials across the country insist, as of today, there is no evidence of any widespread fraud affecting the outcome of the presidential election, that our precious democracy was not tampered with, and that such baseless and false claims are an insult to the thousands of election officials and workers across the country who we have seen dedicating themselves 24/7 to ensure a fair and free election.
Come on, guys, it's all baseless. A similar moment occurred when Fox News host Pete Hegseth reported on air that so far state election officials have not reported serious irregularities with the vote that would argue with the outcome of the race. Immediately after, the Trump-boosting host added, that was in the teleprompter, I read it. I don't know if I even believe it. Yeah. No wonder that a recent poll found 70% of Republicans believe President Donald Trump was cheated out of the election. Where did these Republicans get their news? Outlets like Newsmax are certainly a venue, but the top hosts at Fox, Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, and Laura Ingraham.
In D.C. today, the demonstrations are in support of the president's effort to reveal voter fraud and count all the legal votes. Women for Trump supporters will march to the Supreme Court, urging President Trump not to concede. So far, state election officials have not reported serious irregularities with the vote that would affect the outcome of the race. That was in the teleprompter. I read it. I don't even know if I agree with it, but that happens sometimes. All right.
Okay, so there's a question in the chat. Luke, do you believe that this is now the most secure election in history? I don't have any opinion because I simply don't know enough. I'm not expert enough on voter fraud. So I'm going to listen to people who have devoted their adult lives producing peer-reviewed work and who have testified in court on matters of voter fraud. They're going to be the ones that I look to for clarity on this issue. So Tucker Carlson, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham remain the most prominent source for the president's supporters. Trump alone is not responsible for such vast indoctrination. His baseless claims of a stolen election are just unhinged musings in the absence of a pro-Trump media taking them seriously. No serious person believes that Trump actually won the election until it was stolen from him through a mass conspiracy, as Trump's legal team is arguing. These arguments are made mostly outside of court, since now nearly all of their 30-plus or so legal challenges have been dismissed. Nonetheless, the massive audience of Fox News primetime is being told night after night that there is reason to suspect foul play. Why? Peer-reviewed. Look, you keep saying peer-reviewed. There are peer-reviewed journals on voter fraud. There are peer-reviewed journals that publish articles on voter fraud. And there are experts in voter fraud who testify in court. And whether their arguments hold up in court or whether they're torn to shreds in court, that matters to me. That, in part, determines how much credibility I give them. So people like Chris Kobach and Hans von Popovsky have testified in court and been torn to shreds because they're so ignorant. Fox News is in a very uncomfortable bed of its own making. Who is this expert? How does one become an expert? Well, one demonstration that you're an expert is that you have published books that have been well reviewed by people who know something about the topic. So you can look at The Myth of Voter Fraud by Lorraine Minity and received many positive reviews. Then there's also Richard Hassan. He's another professor. He wrote a book called Election Meltdown. It came out earlier this year. Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. So Kirkus Review praises it. New York Times praises it. The Guardian praises it. Publishers Weekly praises it. Lawrence Lessig, a professor at Harvard, praises it. Founder and president of the Campaign Legal Center praises it. Richard Pills, author of The Law of Democracy, praises it. Larry Sabato, director of the University of Virginia Center for Politics, praises it. These guys have devoted their adult lives to, among other topics, the issue of voter fraud. So yes, I read Election Meltdown, Dirty Tricks, Distrust, and the Threat to American Democracy. And I also read part of The Myth of Voter Fraud by Lorraine Minity. So if there are more informed, more accomplished people who have published in this area, who have testified in this area, then I would love to know what they have to say. So Fox is in an uncomfortable bed of its own making, telling its viewers that Trump is full of it, that the insane conspiracy theories he is pushing are meritless, could prove lethal to the bottom line. The news division's efforts to dispel these increasingly loony conspiracies have enraged viewers, driving them to outlets like Newsmax and OANN, where Trump is the true victor of the 2020 election. Trump transparently complained about Fox News forgetting the golden goose. Trump forgetting that Fox News had long been the dominant network before he entered the political fray. Trump owes far more to Fox News promotion than the other way around, but it does seem that Fox's opinion hosts are concerned that Trump's supporters, like the president himself, not willing to move on to the next administration and are gritting their teeth as long as they can with the hope that Trump gives up the farce before they anger too many of their viewers. If you care about the country and the truth and not Fox's ratings, all you can do is hope that it doesn't go too far. Ratings are dipping at Fox News. Network is actually getting beaten in many metrics by CNN. There are several reasons for this. Election fatigue, certainly. Just like some sports fans don't stay to the end of a game where their team has clearly lost, people turn the TV off, especially if that channel tells them that the team has lost when they want to believe otherwise. The first stage of grief is denial, and many Trump fans are in denial that he lost the election. Few decisions by Fox News has turned that denial into anger. There was the early call of Arizona, which seemed premature given how long it took for every other network to project the state for Biden. There was Neil Cavuto's stunning decision to cut off Kayleigh McEnany's press conference over what he quite fairly considered baseless and spacious claims of voter fraud. That was a total CNN move, said one cable news insider. Fox News has always aired press briefings and let the viewers decide for themselves. And then there was the leaked video of Sandra Smith's shocked reaction delivered off camera when a guest claimed that the election isn't over. What is happening? We've caught it, she said.
Over whoever is decided to be the president. Remember, just because CNN says, or even Fox News says that somebody's president doesn't make them president. So I think everybody wants to know that this was done properly and legally.
What is happening? Like, Trace, we've called it.
And I think we have to look into every one of these concerns.
Yeah, and I think Cleta makes a very good point there, Steve. You know, that look.
Over whoever is decided to be the president. Remember, just because CNN says, or even Fox News says that somebody's president doesn't make them president. So I think everybody wants to know that this was done properly and legally.
What is happening? Like, Trace, we've called it.
And I think we have to look into every one of these concerns.
Yeah, and I think Cleta makes.
Okay, so Ashi Bravo says in the chat, Luke is convinced that if you support a non-mainstream position, that means that you're a loser. I think that's his psychological hang-up. Not at all. I do believe that marginalized people are attracted to marginalized politics, but there are a lot of non-mainstream positions that I hold. I don't believe that they make me a loser. You're a loser if you are talking about politics inappropriately and losing friends and losing jobs as a result. You're a loser if you get out of touch with reality. You're a loser if you're publicly proclaiming things for which the evidence all points in a different direction. You're a loser if you simply tell your audience what it wants to hear. So, but I hold a lot of non-mainstream opinions, and I do not regard myself as a loser.
And more restrictions. In Nashville, officials are limiting gatherings to just 8 people, and Oregon's governor telling people to call the cops on their neighbors if they violate the rules.
This is no different than what happens if there's a party down the street and it's keeping everyone awake. What do neighbors do? They call law enforcement because it's too noisy.
But good help be on the way. The company AstraZeneca announcing its vaccine is up to 90% effective in trials, and Dr. Fauci says all the upcoming vaccines can help crush the pandemic.
Help is on the way. Traditionally and historically, highly efficacious and effective vaccines have crushed epidemics like smallpox and polio and measles. We can do that with the vaccines that are going to be coming online.
So great news about vaccines, and great to have at least 3 options, and more are on the way. But before you get to that point, Jesse, it looks like there's going to be more of these rules and restrictions. Like, I don't think you'd ever rat me out, call the cops if I had more than 8 people over. I don't think you would.
The price is right, Dana. You never know. If there's a fine involved for a reward system, I might pick up the phone. There is a silver lining to these restrictions around Thanksgiving, and that is there's more juicy family gossip going around. Families are silently judging other family members for how they're behaving during the pandemic. So you have the one family that's chock full of the 20-somethings. And these people are high risk. They're like out at the beach, they're at bars. You know, they're coming in and they're going to get everybody sick. You don't really want them to come, but it's hard to tell them not to come. Right. If they do come, you put them at a kid's table, even though they're 26. And if anybody does get sick, you blame that family.
Absolutely.
Then there's the family that just wants credit for coming. They will jump through all these hoops to get there. They've been quarantining for 2 weeks. They've gotten extensive tests done. And they want everybody in the family to know that they will stop at nothing to get there. And so they want credit. you respect the fact that they're getting tested, but you kind of roll your eyes at their theatrics. Then there's the family that is looking for an excuse not to show up.
Yes.
These are the people that don't follow guidelines anyway. But now all of a sudden, oh, they have to follow these guidelines. Sure. You're looking for an out. Fauci gave you an out, and you're pleasantly taking the out. That's fine. You didn't want to be there in the first place.
So, Jesse, which category do you fall in?
Oh, I'm getting there. Then there's the family, or like the uncle or the aunt with the comorbidities. The people that have a lot of underlying conditions, but you don't really want to tell them to their face they have these conditions. Like the aunt that chain smokes and coughs, the uncle that's obese and has a bad ticker. Everybody's saying, you know, Uncle Joe probably shouldn't come, but they don't have the courage to say it to their face. Then there's the liberal family.
Okay.
The liberal family's not going anywhere. You have to go to them. But if you go to them, you can't fly, you have to drive, you have to get tested, you have to get temperature checked before you enter, you have to wear masks, you have to social distance at the table. And if you raise any objections to these preconditions, you are judged as a super spreader.
Okay. And therefore you are doing what?
What do you think?
I think that you're going to be the most responsible and a good son and good dad and good husband.
I'm looking for an out.
You want to watch football. Dagan, it is something we were talking in the green room, that a lot of these rules are not laws. They are the government saying, this is what we want you to do, but there's no law behind it.
No, and the decisions are arbitrary and draconian and made by politicians who are plagued with arrogance-induced idiocy. Here's my favorite. I'm just going to open my phone and look at it. This is on Wednesday. Restaurants and bars are ordered in the state of Pennsylvania that they can't sell alcohol after 5 p.m. until 8 a.m. on Thanksgiving Day. Why is that? Okay, well, you're going to crowd people. People are going to stock up the liquor stores and then crowd into people's homes. There is no rhyme or reason. And all of the restaurant owners and bar owners are waking up to the fact that these politicians have zero idea what they're doing. And they make it worse because they're so condescending and sanctimonious about those very decisions. Out in Los Angeles, where they're in LA County, shutting down restaurants, the restaurant owners are like, wait a minute, we've installed thousands of dollars of this protective equipment and now we can't operate at all. The American people, regular folks, understand how to do a risk-reward analysis, a cost-benefit analysis. They actually know, hey, these lockdowns are hurting our livelihoods, our mental health, they're increasing drug and alcohol abuse, and the politicians can't see that. The American people getting on planes, good for you, going to see relatives, people they even hate, are the ones who will bring this economy out of this malaise. You want to encourage that behavior, not tisk, shame them.
Okay, and then we have Andrew Cuomo, governor of New York, and Greg, he's getting an award.
Yes.
He's getting an Emmy. I know you talked about it Friday. He talked about it today. Let's listen to what he said.
I wish I could say that my daily COVID presentations were well choreographed, scripted, rehearsed, or reflected any of the talents that you advance. They didn't. They offered only one thing: authentic truth and stability. But sometimes that's enough.
Very humble, Greg, very humble.
So I guess that makes Chris Cuomo the smart Cuomo. I always had it reversed. First of all, before I talk about Cuomo, I got to say this about sometimes people unintentionally reveal their major flaws. And Governor Brown revealed that she has no friends or neighbors because no person would ever tell you to call the police on your neighbors, because neighbors never do that because you have to still live there. It's not like you can call the police on your neighbors and say there are 17 people after Thanksgiving and then you're just going to move away. Right. You're there the day after Thanksgiving, and my God, you will pay. If a neighbor did that to me, you will pay in ways that you don't even understand. There are things that I could do to your front lawn that don't go away, and they smell so bad. All right, so to Cuomo. Hey, just to show you that life isn't fair, people think that we should always be striving for fairness. It's good, but life is never fair. So you have one man that ushers in a revolutionary moonshot in terms of a vaccine that's never been done before, and that will be a breakthrough that you can map all future vaccines on. He's called evil, right? He's evil. Then you have a man indirectly infecting thousands of people in restaurants, killing them. He wins an Emmy. So one gets enmity, and another one gets an Emmy. Ooh. And why is that? Because we live in a society that rewards and punishes only words and not deeds. So why did Chris Cuomo, Andrew Cuomo, whatever, win something? It's about his performance, his words, not about what he actually did, because what he did was horrible, absolutely horrible. Meanwhile, we punish Trump for what? Being kind of obnoxious, his words. But what does he do? Well, he just ushered in a brand new phase of vaccines and changed the world. But those are deeds, and we don't reward deeds. We only reward words. That is why there's no real fairness in society, and it makes me sick to my stomach. We deserve an Emmy. This show deserves an Emmy. This show is the best show on TV, and we still don't have an Emmy.
We do deserve an Emmy, don't we, Richard?
You know what? We're too good for Emmys. We're too screw you.
Don't want your Emmys.
You're exactly right.
Screw you, Emmys.
Exactly right. Now, Richard, there are some common sense measures that can be taken.
Okay, here is Jonah Goldberg blasting Molly Hemingway.
They said that they're not aware of anything that could change the outcome there.
Well, it seems everything is proceeding along a certain course, and barring any major surprises, Joe Biden will win the Electoral College and be inaugurated on January 21st. At the same time, there have been reports of election problems, either at the mail-in ballot level or at the vote counting level in various states. And these are issues of concern to Republicans, not just for this election, but really for all elections going forward. This idea that you need to be able to believe these elections have integrity. And the allegations that have been put forth thus far say that there are different standards for how votes are counted depending on what regions of the state they're in. And blue areas have lower standards than red areas, and that this is a problem. And so I think this is a major issue for Republicans, even even if it's not going to affect the particulars of this election, the reason why you're seeing so many Republicans united about it is because this is a very legitimate concern. And this year, when we had this widespread lurch into mail-in voting at the same time that we decreased standards for that, it is reasonable that people would want that to be looked at, and that's what's happening right now. It's all happening.
Harold Ford Jr., Mitt Romney tweeted about this earlier today. He said, quote, having failed to make even a plausible case of widespread fraud or conspiracy before any court of law, the president has now resorted to overt pressure on state and local officials to subvert the will of the people and overturn the election. It is difficult to imagine a worse, more undemocratic action by a sitting American president. We don't know what was said in that meeting, but it didn't seem that there might have been any undue pressure that was put on them, because they certainly didn't talk about it when they left the White House.
Well, first, thanks for having me on. There are 28 judges across many of the states that we've talked about tonight and have been talked about in our network for some time that have said there's no evidence to what the president is saying and his team is saying, and they've dismissed those suits. The president-elect enjoys a 70 electoral vote lead. Vice President Biden, President-elect Biden does. He enjoys a 7 million vote lead. Michigan, he won by 150,000 votes. Yeah. The thing that's most disturbing right now for me, the president has every right to ask for every vote to be counted, and they should. The question is whether or not we're going to allow a transition to start. And even if the President Trump proves out to win, which I doubt will happen, the responsible thing to do is what every other president's done, which is to ensure, the patriotic thing, that the next president is ready to deal with COVID, to deal with an economic recovery, to learn the lessons, the good and the bad of what this administration may know about China, Russia, or for that matter, any foreign adversary. That's a responsible and patriotic thing to do, and I hope at some point very soon President Trump does that.
Jonah Goldberg, I read your column today, and you say that you are just plain angry about this.
Yeah, Donald Trump is trying to steal an election by pretending that the Democrats have stolen the election. Molly's absolutely right about there are issues of fraud and these kinds of things that are very minor. They're very small. They're very scattershot. They don't hold up very well in front of judges, but there's something that we should care about in the long term. That's not what Rudy Giuliani and Sidney Powell and the President of the United States are saying. They are alleging an insane, bat guano, crazy conspiracy theory where Rudy Giuliani is actually saying that most ballots are counted out of the country. They're alleging that those internationally recognized cyber ninjas, the Venezuelans, have hijacked our democracy. And while I don't think that Donald Trump thinks he's going to pull it off, he's trying to keep his options open. And one of the options he would like to keep open is to literally steal an election by claiming that the Democratic Party has stolen an election. It's a pervasive, unpatriotic lie. And we shouldn't just sort of, and look, I care about voter fraud, but saying that this is an important story because it illuminates voter fraud is like saying the Watergate burglary is an important story because it highlighted the problems with security at the Watergate Hotel. It's missing the point.
Molly, we've got 30 seconds here in this segment. What do you say about that?
Well, there are really serious things here, even including in Michigan, where people were pressured into saying that a vote was certified when they felt that they were bullied and their children were doxxed and whatnot. These are things that people should be outraged about. But it is really, really hard to hear someone say that this is inappropriate when for 4 years we had people allege that the 2016 election was stolen through a conspiracy of collusion, or to not say anything against people saying that, to let that conspiracy theory run wild for 4 years and not to be upset about what that did to the country is really problematic. And it makes it hard to take people seriously when they're worried about going to a court of law to talk about legitimate election fraud.
Let Jonah get a quick thought in here. Go ahead, Jonah.
Yeah, that's not. Trump's lawyers are failing time and time again when they go to court because they're not allowed to lie. Donald Trump, Rudy Giuliani, and Sidney Powell are constantly lying. And whatever baggage you might have about the Russia collusion stuff and the conspiracy theories about all of that, that does not give the President of the United States the permission structure to be the first sitting president in American history to refuse to concede a lawful and clear election that he lost.
We're going to have to leave it there, panel, because we...
Okay, back to the Fox News dilemma. For a base of supporters angry that their candidate had lost and looking for a new entity to blame, or while being told by Trump himself to keep fighting, Fox News apparently caving to Biden along with the rest of the mainstream media was a stab in the back. Shockingly, there are now channels out there that will tell people their favorite team is actually winning regardless of the score. So viewers are not just turning off the TV, they're actually migrating to smaller, Trumpier outlets like OANN and Newsmax, which recently reached an impressive 1 million viewers in one crack hour recently. Therein lies the Fox News dilemma: appease or embrace reality. Jonah Goldberg earned attention on Friday when he pushed back on the Federalist Molly Hemingway, flatly stating that Trump is trying to steal an election by falsely claiming the election was stolen. He is absolutely right, yet much of Fox News programming is willfully playing along. Exhibit A is Sunday's Fox and Friends Weekend, where co-host Will Cain offered 3 clear courses of action the Trump administration is undertaking to change the election results. First 2 allegations of local and widespread fraud, neither of which are making any headway in the court since they have failed to provide evidence to back them up. Numerous judges, including some appointed by Trump himself, had methodically dissected and discarded various arguments pronounced before Election Day that if Trump lost, the election would have been rigged. Now he's looking to find something, anything to back up that prediction. In the courts, it works the other way around, where you start with the evidence and you go from there. Jim Bowden says in the chat, Luke, read the book review of David Irving's book, The Warpath, by Cambridge University's famous history professor Hugh Trevor Roper. But once David Irving became a Holocaust denier, he and everyone said he is a quack. So David Irving is complicated. So David Irving has done some valuable scholarship on World War II. On the other hand, he has also been, at times, something of a crackpot. People are complicated. So Hugh Trevor Roper is complicated. He endorsed the fake Hitler diaries. Hugh Trevor Roper is, in his entire academic career, produced one slim book of significance. Back to this essay on Mediaite. Third course of action that Cain suggested is a political one, that the White House needs to convince enough people that there's something nefarious afoot, despite any evidence beyond isolated errors, and encourage state legislators to disregard the actual results and appoint their electors that will literally ignore the will of the people. Hexeth pointed out a Rasmussen poll that showed that 50% of Americans don't feel like this election was above board. The only way that Trump can change the election results is a political, not legal maneuver. It is entirely built upon the deliberate misinformation from people like the hosts and op-ed talking heads on Fox News. Virtually every other opinion host on Fox News spends precious airtime giving rise to what is truly a propaganda-based attempt at stealing the election. Fox News opinion hosts, though not directly advocating for the cause, are willingly doing their part to foster doubt or just asking questions about an election that had remarkably few issues compared to others. Fox News' recent dip in ratings would have any media executive worried, and frankly, it is not good news. That said, their network has been through worse. This current dip, most likely just a short-term reaction, not a long-term problem. Fox News senior management has long eschewed the sort of programming micromanagement one sees at other outlets, allowing the network's top talent and showrunners to make their own editorial and programming decisions. This is far from the micromanagement style that Fox News founder Roger Ailes was notorious for, but it has not interfered with profits. On-air talent and producers will privately admit that they enjoy autonomy, but the lack of a cohesive editorial vision or even an agreed set of facts on which to report can sometimes lead to awkward and dissonant moments like what we saw between Maria Bartiromo and Eric Shawn. Current disconnect between top-rating opinion programming is a problem for the president and executive editor of Fox News, Jay Wallace. Fox News ratings are still dominant. Since Memorial Day, it has been the highest-rated network in all of television for primetime viewers. So I'm not sure if anyone has... no way Fox bounces back for anyone outside of Hannity, Tucker, and Ingram. I am not sure. So anyone listen to the amicus brief on Slate? It's hosted by Talia.
With mail and email and phone calls from concerned citizens all over the country begging me to resign. Don't be a part of it. Don't legitimize this voter suppression sham.
Hopping in to the extra host chair beside me for this series is the wonderful Rick Hasson. His new book, Election Meltdown, which will be out on February 4th, really forms the spine of this mini-series of Amicus. Rick is professor of law and political science at UC Irvine. And if you listen to this show, you know we've had him here as the go-to expert on election law. He's also written extensively for Slate on the topic. And I am just so delighted that he will be here to co-pilot this contested and disorienting terrain as we walk through election integrity and security in 2020. So, Rick, welcome to Amicus.
It's so great to be with you.
And the title you chose for your book and that we've chosen for this series, Election Meltdown, it doesn't really fill me with bubbly optimism. Can you talk about the focus of the book and the series and maybe explain why we're doing it now?
Back in 2012, I wrote a book called The Voting Wars, and the subtitle of that book was From Florida 2000 to the Next Election Meltdown. Well, we've now reached the next election meltdown. We've reached a point where Americans are increasingly distrustful of the election process, whether their votes are going to be fairly and accurately counted. We hear all kinds of talk of voter suppression, of voter fraud, of foreign interference, of stolen elections. And with all of this swirling around, I do worry that we're going to get to a point where people might not accept the results of the election if it does not come out to their liking. And I talk about 4 reasons why I think that Americans' mistrust is increasing in our elections. All 4 of those are illustrated in this clip from a press availability that President Trump had in February 2019.
Mr. President, why haven't you condemned the North Carolina election fraud?
He was asked by NBC News' Hallie Jackson in the Oval Office about recent claims of ballot tampering in a North Carolina congressional race in the 2018 elections.
Well, I condemn any election fraud. And when I look at what's happened in California with the votes, when I look at what happened, as you know, there was just a case where they found 1 million fraudulent votes. When I look at what's happened in Texas, excuse me, when I look at what's happened in Texas, when I look at that catastrophe that took place in Florida, where the Republican candidates kept getting less and less and less and less. Unfortunately, Rick Scott and Ron ended up winning their election, but it was disgraceful what happened there. So I look at a lot of different places all over the country. I condemn any voter fraud of any kind, whether it's Democrat or Republican. But when you look at some of the things that happened in California in particular, when you look at what's happened in Texas with all of those votes that they recently found were not exactly properly done, I condemn all of it, and that includes North Carolina. If anything, I guess they're going to be doing a final report, but I'd like to see the final report. But any form of election fraud, I condemn.
Okay. Well, that was just a buffet, a circus smorgasbord of presidential claims about voting fraud. Why don't you walk us through unpacking what the president was referring to there?
The context here is that there was a disputed election in 2018 in North Carolina's 9th congressional district. It turns out that there was a political operative who was stealing and manipulating absentee ballots. And it was so concerning that the state election board thought that it couldn't determine who the winner of the election was and actually called for a new election. And so Trump was being asked this question when here it was, an actual case of fraud involving an election. But what he does talk about is something else, unsubstantiated claims of voter fraud. He talks about 1 million fraudulent votes in California. And it may have been hard to hear, but Hallie Jackson interjects and says, there weren't those cases, sir. This is an actual case. And if you look at the White House transcript, that's just recorded as inaudible. But I've confirmed that is what Jackson actually said. There were not 1 million fraudulent votes in the state of California. As we'll hear later on in the show, there's not a massive problem of non-citizen voting in Texas. And so this is what I write about in Election Meltdown. These 4 concerns. Republican voter suppression, incompetence by both Democrats and Republicans in how elections are being administered, dirty tricks, not just what we saw in North Carolina, but the Russian interference. And we'll talk about a Democratic attempt at some dirty tricks in a 2017 Senate race in the state of Alabama. And this incendiary rhetoric that we hear from both sides about stolen and rigged elections. Put them all together, that's the concern. And then the question is, what can we do about it? Spoiler alert, I don't have any good short-term solutions. So we're in some potentially serious trouble as we approach the 2020 elections.
Okay, here's a young woman who stood up for the police and at a Black Lives Matter rally and got abused for it.
Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Where'd they go? Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Hands up! Don't shoot! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Hands up! Don't shoot! Hands up! Don't shoot! Girl! Baby girl! You're not walking away anywhere! Fuck that sign! Justice for Kevin Jones,
Look how hot
You're
she
not
is.
going anywhere! This is horrible! Bitch, you think this is funny? Bitch, you think being Denver is fucking funny? You think black people being Stop the title!
Look how hot she is.
The privilege that they are exonerated! The privilege to self-entitlement! Hey, what the fuck are you doing? Hey! Racist! You fucking Girl, baby girl, you're not walking away anywhere. Fuck that sign. Justice for Kevin Jones.
Wow. There do seem to be some physical differences between those who want to defund the police and those who support the police. Physiognomy seems to be quite real.
Okay, so let's start. You said there's a coin. It's got heads and tails. Let's start with the heads. The claim that there has been and there continues to be and there certainly will be in 2020 widespread voter fraud in this country.
So Trump didn't just discover voter fraud as something to yell about. He's been making these claims for a long time. Before he was President Trump, he was candidate Trump, and the rigged election was a central theme of his campaign.
You know, I've been talking about a rigged system for a long time. And I'm afraid the election's going to be rigged. I have to be honest. The only way we can lose, in my opinion, I really mean this, Pennsylvania, is if cheating goes on. I really believe it. And believe me, there's a lot going on. Do you ever hear these people? They say there's nothing going on. People that have died 10 years ago are still voting. Illegal immigrants are voting. Remember, we're competing in a rigged election. This is a rigged election, folks, okay?
After he was elected, he kept carrying on casting doubts about the election results. And that was kind of surprising because he was the election winner. I think the reason he was doing this was because although he won the Electoral College vote, as we all know, he lost the popular vote by about 3 million people. And lo and behold, here he was claiming that there were about 3 million people who were casting fraudulent votes. And he ends up going on to claim that all of those votes went to Hillary Clinton. He tells ABC's David Muir, none of those votes come to me. None of them. None of them. He repeated this claim in a closed-door meeting of congressional leaders in February of 2017. And after a collective jaws drop, not for the first time and not for the last, here's White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer trying to defend the president's comments the next day.
Does the president believe that millions voted illegally in this election? And what evidence do you have of widespread voter fraud in this election, if that's the case?
The president does believe that. He has stated that before. I think he stated his concerns of voter fraud and people voting illegally during the campaign. And he continues to maintain that belief based on studies and evidence that people have presented to him.
Studies and evidence that people have presented to him, right? So who's talking to him? I have an idea about who one of those people might be, and I'm pretty certain one was Chris Kobach. Kobach was the Kansas Secretary of State at the time. He was angling for a job in the Trump administration, and he was the only one out there backing up Trump's claims of potentially millions of fraudulent votes in the election.
Somebody like Kobach comes and jumps in his lap and said, I'm your boy, because this is what I've been working on my whole career. And I think Trump probably looked at him as some kind of an expert, surrounded by other experts, and said, I'm just going to turn this over to the experts.
That's Matt Dunlap, who was then and still is the Secretary of State of the state of Maine. Secretaries of State are the chief election officers in each state. They're the ones that set the basic ground rules for running elections. And we're going to hear a lot about them in this series. Anyway, Dunlap told me how back in March of 2017, just a couple of weeks after the president made that remark about 3 million fraudulent votes being cast, and when Sean Spicer tried to defend that at a White House presser, Dunlap gets a call from his opposite number in Kansas, Secretary of State Chris Kobach.
And he called me up and said, it looks like the president may actually do something with this claim and put together a commission to investigate the integrity of our elections. And would you be interested in being a part of that?
Rick, why are they even reaching out to Democrats like Dunlap? Why is that even of interest to them?
Election reform commissions have been around for a while, and they always had the same model: bipartisan, evenly divided, people of stature at the top of the commission. So there was a commission after the 2000 election with President Carter and President Ford. There was one in 2004 with President Carter and James Baker, who was the Republican Secretary of State. There was one after 2012 with Bob Bauer, who was Obama's lawyer, and Ben Ginsburg, who was Mitt Romney's lawyer. Bipartisan, high-profile people. This commission was different. It was lopsided towards Republicans, but they wanted to have at least some Democrats on the commission, maybe Democrats they thought they could push around, in order to give the veneer of bipartisanship to it.
Despite the fact that this was now bipartisan and that Matt Dunlap was named as a commissioner, you did not hold out tremendous hope for its findings. I'm guessing that has a little something to do with your longstanding tracking of Chris Kobach.
Well, so if you look at who was put on the commission, 4 of the 13 commissioners included what I believe it was the Lawyers Committee called the 4 horsemen of the voter suppression apocalypse. You had on there Chris Kobach, who was known for making false and exaggerated claims of voter fraud. Hans von Spakovsky, who heads an elections initiative at the Heritage Foundation and has long made debunked claims of voter fraud and exaggerated voter fraud.
Hans von Spakovsky, walks around with this spiral-bound document documenting over 1,000 cases of documented voter fraud. And they're real. I mean, these are convictions for people who did things wrong in elections. But what he doesn't tell you is that they date back to 1948.
J. Christian Adams, a former DOJ lawyer who made his name by trying to claim that the new Black Panthers in Philadelphia were a major problem, that got featured on Fox News. This was after, I believe it was the 2008 election. And then there was Kenneth Blackwell, former Republican Secretary of State of Ohio, who was maybe most famous for trying to reject voter registration forms because they were not printed on a heavy enough weight of paper. If you were trying to come up with a rogues gallery of the people who were most likely to put out incendiary claims of voter fraud, it would be these 4. I wrote about these people years ago for Slate, and I believe it was you, Talia, who came up with the title for them, the Fraudulent Fraud Squad, which I grabbed and have been running with ever since.
This is as though the president wanted to put together a Elvis Lives commission and found the 4 people who have cited Elvis in Las Vegas in the last 20 years and put them on the commission.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like the Bigfoot Commission. This commission, I think, was not set up to investigate, but instead to confirm Trump's widespread claims of voter fraud. And then I think the end game was to then propose federal legislation, which would make it harder for people to register to vote. So the commission was established in May 2017. It had a handful of Democrats, mostly these diehard, true-believing voter fraud mythmakers. I felt strongly that Matt Dunlap should not take part in the commission. I wrote an op-ed in a local Maine paper arguing that he shouldn't. And I wasn't the only one who thought his participation was a bad idea.
Immediately upon the announcement, I was inundated with mail and email and phone calls from concerned citizens all over the country begging me to resign. Don't be a part of it. Don't legitimize this, voter suppression sham. And my response was always like, well, if I'm there, I have a bullhorn in my hand if something goes untowardly, never for a moment understanding what I was actually saying.
One of the first things the commission does is sends out a letter where it asks each state to turn over their voter registration files. And we think this was because they were going to do some kind of matching with DHS records to try and figure out if there were a lot of non-citizens voting. Lots of secretaries of state.
Okay, so looking at Nate Silver on Twitter, he tweets, it's fairly hard to infer how people would have behaved if the election were close enough that Trump's efforts to overturn the result would have stood a chance. I mean, we know how Trump would have behaved, but everyone else, courts, state officials, etc. Steve Saylor responds, it's almost as if Donald Trump has a multi-decade track record of playing hardball within the legal system and then accepting what the courts decide. And Saylor also writes on Twitter, systemic racism is a conspiracy theory, distinctive for its hand-waving away its actual lack of causal connections, whereas other conspiracy theorists point to, say, Bilderberg meetings. Systemic racism theorists take pride in not explaining how their theory actually works. So what's going on with the transition here? Let's have a look at a segment here from Fox News with Brett Barry.
You call a gigantic press conference like that, one that lasts an hour, and you announce massive bombshells, then you better have some bombshells. There better be something at that press conference other than what we got. I talked to so many people who were blown away by it, by the very nature of the press conference. They promised blockbuster stuff, and then nothing happened.
Well, Rush Limbaugh talking about the Trump legal team and that big press conference they had. This as the official certification by the state of Michigan has happened today. Pennsylvania expected tomorrow. As the big news during this hour, the president has authorized the GSA to start the official transition with the Biden team. The president tweeting out earlier, I want to thank Emily Murphy at GSA for her steadfast dedication, loyalty to our country. She has been harassed, threatened, and abused, and I do not want to see this happen to her, her family, or employees of GSA. Our case strongly continues. We will keep up the good fight, and I believe we will prevail. Nevertheless, in the best interest of our country, I'm recommending that Emily and her team do what needs to be done with regard to initial protocols and have told my team to do the same. Meantime, the Biden team has now responded with a statement, a long statement, but in essence it says this final decision is a definitive administrative action to formally begin the process of transition with federal agencies. And in the days ahead, transition officials will begin meeting with federal officials to discuss the pandemic response, a full accounting of our national security interests, and gain complete understanding of the Trump administration's efforts to hollow out government agencies. That's the statement from the Biden-Harris transition team. But that has officially kicked off tonight with the GSA's letter to the Biden team. Let's bring in our panel. Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, and Ben Domenech, publisher of The Federalist. We expect Byron York here sometime soon. Mara, let me start with you. This is the most movement we've seen, and obviously the president said his fight continues, but he also said the transition has to start.
Okay, we'll keep an eye on Fox News, see if anything important breaks. Anyway, some perspective from January of this year. Election law professor Rick Hasson talking to Talia Lithwick of Slate on their Amicus podcast.
And each state objected, right? This is a state matter to run elections rather than we don't have a single federal list of everyone running for elections. So unsurprisingly, someone like Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State of California, objected, seeing this as a sham commission aimed to trumpet up claims of voter fraud. But also some Republicans objected. So Mississippi Secretary of State Delbert Hosemann, a conservative Republican who...
And the chat mocks me as claiming that peer-reviewed experts always tell the truth. Well, it's pretty clear, I think, that many of the positions I hold would be rejected by peer-reviewed experts. So peer-reviewed experts obviously do not always tell the truth. But who do you turn to always tell you the truth? No human being, no process is always going to tell you the truth. The legal process is not going to always tell you the truth. But compared to some rando on Twitter, I would prefer peer-reviewed experts who have a lengthy track record. And let's get a little bit more here from Fox News.
But it is the formal recognition, Ben, and this letter from GSA that starts this process officially.
I think this is a significant development, and I think it also kind of disproves a lot of things that people who've engaged in fever dreams about the president holding on to power well after this election. I think a lot of that, they really were jumping the gun with it. Obviously the Bush v. Gore fight went on for 37 days. I think you're going to continue to see some legal arguments made on the president's behalf. But really, the past several years have been such I think, a proof of the fact that our republic is very strong, that its guardrails are very solid, that the courts, as Mara said, can rule on these things, and that the law is followed. And I think that this is just another indication of the president, coming to grips with the result, as narrow as it is and as frustrating as it is to him. It is, as you say, not a situation where the Biden team needed that $6.3 million, but it is significant in terms of a development and a decision on the part of the president himself.
Yeah, joining us now, part of the panel, Byron York, chief political correspondent for the Washington Examiner. Byron, this follows a weekend that was a tough weekend for the Trump legal team, let alone some losses they've seen in states. You had this essential breakup publicly with Sidney Powell, who was included in the Trump legal press conference, seemed like a member of the team, but they said that she's not a member of the team anymore and doing her own thing. Here's Rudy Giuliani earlier tonight trying to explain what's happening on the Trump legal team.
I think it's because we're pursuing two different theories. Our theory of the case to get to the Supreme Court, now in 4 places, and it's soon going to be in 2 others, and there'll be an overall lawsuit, is basically misconduct of the election by state officials in at least 5 or 6 different states, in which the misconduct of the election involves deprivation of constitutional rights for the president.
So obviously they're continuing these legal battles, and they want to get to the Supreme Court. But you heard the frustration in Rush Limbaugh saying, where is the there if you're going to have this big rollout? Byron.
Well, it's been a pretty disastrous weekend for the Trump legal team. First of all, on Saturday, they lost their big case in Pennsylvania for a number of reasons, the biggest being that they were pointing out a couple of relatively small problems and then asking that the certification of the whole state, close to 7 million voters, just be stopped. So that just didn't work at all, got thrown out. They're going to appeal, and that's not going to work either. And then there was the whole Sidney Powell thing, where on Thursday she posited this astonishing theory that the election was stolen because of software developed in Hugo Chavez's Venezuela and a massive influx of communist money from Venezuela, Cuba, and possibly China. And she didn't offer any evidence to support this. And she didn't go before much difficult. She wouldn't answer questions about it. And by Sunday night, clearly the legal team had had enough. They cut her loose. And believe me, they had presented her on Thursday as a member of the legal team. So the big picture here is this legal effort is winding down. They've exhausted most of their possibilities. This Hail Mary pass of the great Venezuelan conspiracy is not going to work. And what you saw today with the GSA action, plus the problems with the legal teams, indicates that this challenge overall is winding down.
Yeah, quickly, Mara, you have this GSA announcement, what the president tweeted, which is a significant development, as we talked about. But as these legal efforts kind of come to a close, how does this all factor into the Georgia runoff January 5th?
Okay, we'll keep an eye on Fox News for any important developments in the news. Meanwhile, on media, important column here on Fox News. Fox has dominated for most of the last 2 decades by playing the long game, so they will probably ignore some of the short-term hyperventilating. But the trend line since the night of the election is going in the wrong way for Fox. That's something they need to address. As goes Fox News primetime, so goes half the nation. It's reasonable to assume that the 2020 election won't be over till Tucker, Sean, Laura, and the Five, and Fox and Friends, or deem it so. Yes, there will be fringe members of the Trump base that will now lump Fox into the lamestream media set, but Fox's news footprint is big enough to take that hit. So when will Fox News start to pivot to the post-Trump presidency? It is impossible to know, and the answer might be never.
I mean, will the president, do you think, as these kind of run their course, get to a place where he is going to give a concession speech?
Well, that is the $60 million question. I don't know if the president will ever actually concede. The other big question about the Georgia runoffs, Lynn Wood, one of the president's attorneys, tweeted that Republicans shouldn't vote for the Republican candidates in those runoffs because they're not supporting the president enough. The big question for a lot of Republicans is how much effort will President Trump put out to help them?
The president tweeted out, you shouldn't listen to people saying don't support the Republicans in the
right. Well,
race.
he's at odds with some other Republicans now. Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sorry to interrupt. Finish your thought.
Yeah, no. So that's the question. Will there be any divisions inside the Republican family that will hurt the efforts of Loeffler and Perdue in Georgia? We don't know that.
Yeah, that's one to watch, January 5th. All right, panel, stand by. Next up, foreign policy. What's happening in the Middle East, plus the president-elect's pick for Secretary of State, and how that foreign policy...
Okay, back to this article on Fox News. A reasonable person might predict that it would take a week or two, but there is no set date or schedule. Top voices at the network cannot get ahead of Trump. They've already made several decisions that pissed off viewers, calling Arizona so early being the original sin, will likely follow Trump's lead. The viewers of Tucker Carlson on Thursday night saw one of the first cracks in the Trump-Fox wall. Tucker Carlson announced that he had invited attorney Sidney Powell on his show to provide evidence of a wild claim that the election rigging scheme was communist in flavor, with roots in the scheming of late Venezuelan dictator Hugo Chavez. Sidney Powell refused. Carlson caught her out on air, drawing fire from Powell, who called him rude on Maria Bartiromo's show Friday morning. So Carlson pointed out that Sidney Powell had not provided evidence to support her conspiracy theories and was duly rewarded with bile. His mentions on Twitter are filled with MAGA and QAnon users declaring him a traitor or sellout. Considerable quotient of MAGA Twitter has deemed Tucker a sleeper agent for all powerful Democrats. This perfectly illustrates the dangerous tightrope walk being indelicately pursued by Fox News. If Trump refuses to step down or ever accept that he lost the election fairly and squarely, Fox News hosts continue to cower in the face of his conspiracy theories. Large subset of the more than 70 million Americans who voted for Trump will always believe 2020 to have been a stolen election. That's a remarkably dangerous position to be in with tensions on either side. The lucrative approach for Fox News is to continue to draw in viewers with more conspiracy theories, which is what a free market system devoid of any journalistic responsibility would suggest being the profitable path, but the responsible and the journalistically sound decision is to call facts as facts. Fox News executives have to make the fundamental decision. They are staying in the news business, and the chat notes that there is peer-reviewed research which has been found to be false. Of course, there is peer-reviewed research which is found to be false or flawed. So what do you do instead? You just side with random, anonymous accounts on Twitter that these blokes are the true election fraud experts. Count me skeptical.
Who was protecting his state's rights to be able to run their elections, said, quote, "They can go jump in the Gulf of Mexico, and Mississippi is a great state to launch from." What he's objecting to is not the claims of voter fraud as so much as here's the federal government trying to steal the state's traditional power.
Wait, you say there's no such thing as peer-reviewed? Bro, the Kaufman's critique was peer-reviewed. It was peer-reviewed before it was published. Leaders in the field reviewed the Kaufman's critique, and they pronounced it kosher. And you're gonna argue with that?
Power over their elections. And we'll talk about this later on, but decentralization of our elections is a central feature and bug of the process. So the commission had a number of problems. Turns out that there are set rules as to how presidential advisory commissions have to work. They have to communicate on the record. It seemed like the Republicans were coordinating behind the scenes. There's this lack of transparency. Dunlap doesn't know what's happening. He doesn't even know when the commission is going to have a meeting. And so he writes a strongly worded letter, but the reaction is not what he expected.
A few days later, about a week later, I got an email from the White House saying, that they were reviewing my request with their legal counsel. And I just scratched my head and I thought, am I not on this commission? Why do I have to go through legal counsel to find?
And the chat says, I bet you wouldn't argue that Big Pharma controls the New England Journal of Medicine. I'm not sure if it controls. I'm not expert on this. It does seem that Big Pharma has a huge influence on the New England Journal of Medicine. Yeah, come on, guys. How lucky we are to live in these peer-reviewed times. What were better times? In the Stone Age, when you'd wait for the priest or the shaman to bless some research? For all their flaws, American universities are the best in the world. China only has 2 of the world's top 100 universities. Probably 8 of the top 10 universities in the world are American. 90% of the top 40 universities in the world are American. American university has its flaws, but they are better than the alternatives. Guys, did you know that Talia Lavin infiltrated white supremacy?
Be speaking with Talia Lavin, who is author of the book Culture Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. Talia, great to have you on. I appreciate your time. Thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
So you did something very interesting, which is you, and potentially harrowing, which is you jumped into some of the dark recesses of the internet that I will often mention, but recommend my audience not dive into. And this includes white supremacy, anti-Semitism, and all sorts of different areas. Talk a little bit about why you did this and sort of how you dipped your toes into this pool to begin with.
Yeah, so I'm
How pompous do you have to be like David Pakman to recommend to your audience that they don't dip in here? Like, who on earth is swayed by anything David Pakman says? That, like, is there really one single human being in the entire universe who thought, oh, I want to dip into the online world of white supremacy, but David Pakman says not to, therefore I'm going to abstain? Come on, man. Stop with the malarkey.
Jewish woman, and I've been writing about the far right for a few years before the book even came out. And with that came a response from the white supremacist, white power community. And my reaction to various waves of harassment, that were vehemently misogynistic, vehemently anti-Semitic, was essentially to, instead of kind of curling up and shrinking back and stop talking, was to dive deeper. I wanted to see who these people were, where they were coming from, how they were getting to my Twitter feed. And, it was sort of a situation where the abyss was looking at me, and I decided to gaze back. And
hey, I give Talia Lavin credit. She's never blocked me, and I've probably criticized her on 2 occasions.
Drag what I saw back out into the light.
So what did you find about the source of many of the sort of hateful and trolling messages that you were getting?
And the chat says, Luke, speak on the FAA certifying 737 MAX and it crashes twice. Okay, this is absurd. I'm not an expert on airline safety. So anything I give you will be ill-considered. One thing I do know, those 2 crashes with the 737 MAX, they were on third world airlines. They weren't on first world airlines. These third world airlines have an abysmal safety record. So, yeah, I think it was substantially, in all likelihood, pilot error. How come third world airlines have an abysmal safety record? First world airlines have a pretty damn good safety record. The 737 MAX was not crashed by an Australian airline or an American airline or a Canadian or an English or a French or a German or a Swedish or Norwegian airline. All right, it was crashed by exactly the type of country that you would expect to be incredibly incompetent. So I believe that pilot error, without being an expert in this area, was a significant factor in these crashes. If you had competent pilots, I am skeptical that these crashes would have occurred. Come on, man. Cut out the malarkey.
So I decided to take a broad view and look at both the development of the contemporary white power movement and what it looks like, how it manifests, and where they congregate. So I spent a lot of time looking at particularly an encrypted chat app called Telegram, and which has like very strong free speech protections and sort of never bans content, really. So it's become kind of a thriving ground for white supremacists who, particularly in 2019, faced some bannings from mainstream social media like Facebook and Twitter. And so
the chat's challenged me, come on, bro, admit that the FAA fucked up. Yeah, they've effed up in the sense that they didn't make the 737 MAX, idiot-proof. All right? That's what we're doing with most of these redesigns. We're trying to make things idiot-proof. So they had to change some things to make them less susceptible to crashing by incompetent, idiotic pilots. The FAA has to admit it effed up, because the FAA is not going to come along and say, oh, these third world airlines employ incompetent pilots who don't know how to fly a plane. It's much easier to blame Boeing and first world technology when third world people misuse the technology. So if they're going to fine tune this technology now with the 737 MAX, that doesn't mean that Boeing was responsible for these 2 crashes. Just means that it was impolitic for them to blame third world incompetent pilots. Now, I'm not an expert. It may indeed be that this plane and its software were just horrific, and that the software and the Boeing Corporation was primarily responsible for these crashes. Well, how come first world airlines didn't have these crashes? How come it's incompetent third world airlines only that had these crashes? So now you have to fine-tune all sorts of things to make life increasingly idiot-proof. You have to put warning labels on beds and sheets and pillows. You have to make, aspirin containers idiot-proof. Now you even have to make the bloody 737 MAX idiot-proof. Come on, man, cut out the malarkey.
That's where I spent a lot of my book research looking into. And I found a lot of different tendencies and communities of interest within the white power movement that I spend the book Culture Warlords exploring.
Did you talk a little bit about how you existed in some of these spaces? I mean, did you develop a character, a series of characters, alter egos that you kind of took on?
Yeah, so I didn't actually set out to write a gonzo journalism book. It's just that when you're a Jewish woman and when you've been kind of an outspoken anti-fascist for years, it's hard to get in the front door. People who are white supremacists won't grant you an interview. You know, one of my earlier attempts was to try and get into, there's a sort of powerlifting-based white supremacist pagan cult that that has these solstice celebrations, and I tried to get in just as a reporter. And much later, one of the guys I was talking to was like, "Oh, we would never let a Jew in." Anyway, so you know, it was hard to get in the front door. And so as a result, I found myself sort of having to get a little creative and find these backdoor routes, and that included making sock puppets, sock puppet accounts, to just kind of squat.
Okay, let's have a look at the chat. So you're arguing that the FAA won't admit certain things due to political correctness. I'm saying that political correctness has an effect on how government agencies, including the FAA, do their job. So the FAA will lie for third worlders, but not our election people. It's not a matter of, you just want these clear-cut, you just want to believe that this segment of the population's evil and this segment of the population's good, and you just want like clear-cut good and evil to reign in the world, and it doesn't work that way. So whatever the FAA does with regard to regulating the 737 MAX says nothing about the prevalence of voter fraud. Right? That connection only exists in your fantasy. By your logic, they are afraid due to PC. Yes, PC intimidates people. Does not invalidate everything that every government agency has ever legislated, but yes, there is often intimidation by political correctness. By your own logic, the election people would do the same thing if illegal voted. No, because people who commit murder are still arrested and frequently convicted for committing murder, even if they are people of color. So just because political correctness intimidates some people and has some effect on how regulators operate does not mean that then people of color can just get away with every single thing. You simply fail to produce substantial evidence of voter fraud. You wish to live in a fantasy world. I prefer to live in reality. If you believe that there's massive voter fraud that stole the 2020 election from Donald Trump, then present the evidence. Show the evidence. Who has the evidence? Look, I wish you all the best with Sidney Powell. You and Sidney Powell make a wonderful team, but come on, man, cut out the malarkey.
And listen. And in some other cases, having to be a little more proactive and inventing kind of identities from whole cloth in order to get into more private chats. And in one case, I infiltrated a white supremacist dating site, whitedate.net, with a whole character who didn't look like me or have my background as kind of a coarse Brooklyn Jew. And I got these forlorn white supremacists looking for love to write love letters to their ideal white wife and send them to me. And I printed them in the book. And it was sort of a car crash between Nicholas Sparks and Mein Kampf.
Did you make any of what you would consider to be friends during this process?
No. I mean, it's not generally my...
That's hard to believe that she didn't make friends with fascists. And Isaiah Selassie says the dirty little secret is the world does indeed work on a paradigm of good and evil. Yes, and you can present that case. And it's so infinitely flexible that it cannot be falsified. So if you look at the world through the lens of faith, you can always... adjust things so that your faith is always validated. But I never argue faith on this show because faith is incredibly subjective.
My practice to make friends with people who want me dead.
Right.
But within my character, I mean, I tried not to be like that active an infiltrator. You know what I mean? You don't want to be the one.
Lucas pretending that illegals wouldn't vote. Well, let's just look at the very simple incentive structure that would operate. You're here in the United States illegally. If you vote illegally in your court, you become a felon. You would be sentenced to prison for 5-7 years. You'd be fined. You'd be deported. Your life and the life of your family would be made hell. And on the upside, you get to cast one vote. Right? It makes absolutely zero rational sense to believe that illegal Americans are voting en masse. They face no incentives for doing so. All the incentives are against them participating. Now, isn't illegal voting here and voting there? Yeah, in odd occasions, people do odd things. But on a rational basis, what are the incentives for an illegal in the United States to vote illegally? They get to cast one vote at a tremendous risk to their own welfare. What kind of idiot would do that?
Amping up the stochastic terror. You want to say just enough to pass and remain in the room. But
it makes plenty of sense. Incentive is open borders. One person, all right? One person. His vote is not going to bring about open borders. His vote's not going to mean anything. On the other hand, he faces substantial risks by voting illegally. It makes zero sense that there would be widespread voting by illegal aliens. There are voter fraud scenarios that make sense. That is not one of them. It's a shame that you haven't read any books on this topic.
In one particular event, there was sort of an MMA fight being organized between pagan white supremacists and Christian white.
And there's hundreds of thousands of illegals voting in each city, and yet you have zero evidence. You just make stuff up and just toss it out there. You couldn't be bothered to do any research. You live in a fantasy world along with Sidney Powell, and you just inflate and create these insane scenarios that go against all common sense.
Supremacists to support the presidential run of a white nationalist Satanist. And so I got deeply involved in the planning chats for that group and wound up talking pretty extensively to one Christian extremist and telling him all about how his fascist love of Christ had saved my life. Just funny things to have to do from my apartment in Brooklyn.
I'm interested in this religious component. In your experience, kind of weaving your way through these communities, we know about the Christian roots of the KKK as an example, but at the same time, there are many people who get pulled into white.
And chat says, bro, they don't even have voter ID. Who's going to prosecute them? Like if they have a Democratic attorney general, who's going to prosecute them? So you seriously believe that tens of thousands of illegals are voting in America because they're just so sure that Democratic attorney generals not going to prosecute them, and they can get away with it because there aren't voter ID laws. And show some evidence, bro. Where's the evidence? Come on, man. Cut out the malarkey.
Nationalism and white supremacy who are not particularly religious. How relevant was religion, would you say, in these different enclaves?
Well, the group that I was studying primarily were sort of these radicalized white power guys, right? We know that within the mainline.
Luke is pretending that a Democratic attorney general is going to prosecute illegals. Barack Obama's administration deported more illegals and arrested more illegals than Donald Trump. So yeah, there you have a Democratic administration prosecuting, arresting, deporting illegals. So yes, Democrats do it too. Come on, man, cut out the malarkey.
Sort of MAGA movement, which has its fascistic undertones. Religion plays quite a large role. This idea that Trump is selected by God and we must fight for him and everyone else has served Satan. The group that I was speaking to tended to skew younger, were a little more disaffected with religion, but what they really took from religion. In the case of the Christian white supremacists, there was this absolute fixation on the Crusades as kind of a lost cause, this battle between noble white warriors and swarthy interlopers that they kind of interposed onto contemporary anti-immigrant, anti-Muslim dialogue. So it was kind of like them viewing themselves as crusaders and flying the Templar cross at racist rallies. In the case of pagan white supremacists, heathen white supremacists, you had this fixation on Vikings, this idea of white manliness, and the idea of the Norse pantheon as an indigenous white European religion. And one of the things that sort of surprised and tickled me was that many heathen white supremacists are drawn to the worship of the Norse pantheon by the idea that Christianity was started by a Jew and is thus tainted by the Jewish taint forever. And so you can literally be Jesus Christ, and that's not enough for some anti-Semites, which was sort of a funny discovery to make.
The people you came across, what portion did you get this? I mean, it could be just difficult to tell, but did you get a sense of what portion would be willing to sort of go and actually take violence into their own hands in the real world versus how many of them are sort of existing in these online spaces and that's as far as they're willing to go?
So when I tallied up the Telegram groups I was involved in, and of course that's not the most scientific measure, but I joined between 90 and 100 of these chats. And collectively, they had tens of thousands of members.
Sure.
Right? And one of the big problems facing researchers and journalists in this area is that it's quite simply very hard to tell which young man spewing violent and genocidal rhetoric is going to be the one that snaps. So, I have a close friend who is an anti-fascist and who was several times threatened directly by Robert Bowers, who went on to allegedly shoot 11 Jews in the Tree of Life synagogue. And it's just very hard to tell. It's hard to tell, when you're looking at this sea of essentially stochastic terror, this sort of perpetual motion machine towards radicalization and violence, who is going to be the one to snap. And that's why I talk about how the importance isn't necessarily the raw numbers, but about the tenor of the conversation. And, when you are marinating in stochastic terror, marinating in racial violence, marinating in the dehumanization of your supposed racial enemies, this is an environment that's specifically cued to get people to snap, to radicalize, to engage in violence, to stockpile guns.
When I have interviewed former white nationalists and white supremacists, including folks like Frank Mink and many others of these folks who have now become anti-racist advocates, they almost unanimously tell the same story about how they were pulled in, which is that they sort of found either an attention or what they felt as support or a community where they had an absence of it, typically in their family life growing up. Like it's almost cliche, but it's the story they almost all tell. Did you get any sense of, at the individual level, how the folks you came across ended up in these movements?
Yeah, I mean, particularly on the white supremacist dating site, there was often there was a segment, in the bios where people described their politics and how they came to be on a white supremacist dating site. And a lot of the stories started with YouTube. There were a lot of divorces in their backstories. There were a lot of people in the military. I would say that the most consistent theme was a sense of alienation.
Right.
And I think, as we all know, that sense of alienation, lack of community, desire for purpose, it crosses socioeconomic lines. It crosses geographical divides. It's really a question of sort of how deep is your feeling of alienation and displacement, and that can have a lot of different causes. I think it's a mistake when people say, oh, it's just toothless Cletus, in his mother's basement, when what I saw was really a movement that spanned geographical lines, socioeconomic lines. These were people with lives and sometimes spouses, sometimes people who were in college. The myth that everyone is sort of Southern and uneducated is really a self-absolving myth that white liberals use to say it couldn't be anyone in my neighborhood, couldn't be anyone in my school or my HOA, when in fact it could. It's just a matter of people feeling lost and the white supremacist, white power movement really offering you.
Okay, so question in the chat, Luke. Why would Democrats get rid of voter ID, signature verification, etc., if they didn't want fraud? All right, good question. I'm not a voter fraud expert, and the uncharitable interpretation is that the Democrats clearly want fraud. The other way to look at it is that the easier you make voting, the easier it will be for democratically inclined voters to vote. So the conventional wisdom is that the fewer people show up to the polls, the better that is for the Republican Party, the more difficult you make voting. So that's in Republicans' interest. The easier you make it to vote, that is in the interest of the Democratic Party. So that's the answer.
This mythos of you can become involved, you can save the white race, we will give you a sense of purpose in your life. And I think a lot of us are looking for a sense of purpose. A lot of us are feeling lost and alienated, and we all find that in different ways. But that's the sort of compelling argument they make is here's a chance to be part of a community of people saving the white race.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is there's a similar pattern to a lot of the people that get sucked into the cult of Trumpism, which is believing that it will provide solutions to problems that may well be real, but they get tricked about where the solutions are, and that seems to be a kind of...
Okay, so I'm arguing with the chat, and throw down in the chat what you think your level of expertise is on this topic. So I'm someone who's read a few books on voter fraud, listened to a few podcasts. So compared to, say, a 10 out of 10 as someone who's just, peak expert on the topic of voter fraud, and 0 out of 10, someone who knows nothing, 1 out of 10, someone who just listened to some talk radio, I think I'm probably a 3 or a 4. So what do you think is your own level of expertise on voter fraud, given that you haven't read any books, that you haven't consulted people who are actually expert in this area? You're so very confident in your own views, and you're only confident because you don't know anything. So I'm just curious, what's your own self-perception of your level of expertise in voter fraud? So I threw down, I think I'm a 3 or a 4 on a 1 to 10.
Interesting overlap in hearing you describe it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of any sort of radicalizing movement, right?
Yeah.
Is that they look at you, look at your vulnerabilities, look at what you're seeking, and then become that, love bomb you.
Can you apply for a PhD in voter fraud? Yes, you can do a PhD in political science, and you can write your PhD thesis on voter fraud.
Although, frankly...
But I'm not sure that you would be able to apply for it, because you would need to demonstrate some level of academic excellence, and you probably wouldn't be able to get into any kind of elite program. So I assume you went to a state college, bro.
The tenor of conversation is quite puerile and often very cruel. There's not a lot of love bombing going on, but there is a sense of you are a warrior. There's really a regression into very toxic and narrow gender.
And Isaiah says, I'm confident of my general view of human nature. I'm confident of my theory of politics. It's very easy to be confident when your general views are based upon leaps of faith, because they can never be falsified. Now, I love Isaiah's worldview. I spar with him a bit on the show, but I feel generally aligned with Isaiah's worldview. But it is not impressive to say that you feel confident about something that depends upon a subjective leap of faith.
Roles, this idea of you will be a manly man, a warrior for the white race. an encouragement towards survivalism, towards stocking up guns, but really the sense of kind of propping up embattled masculinity and making that be part of a community that has this sort of overall quote unquote noble purpose.
The book is fascinating. It's Culture Warlords, My Journey into the Dark Web of White Supremacy. We've been speaking with the book's author, Talia Lavin.
Yeah, come on, guys. Watch out. Gotta watch out for the malarkey. The Kraken has died, says Ray.
Hey, guys. 9 days ago, Trump made the following tweet. Donald Trump here, and again, this was on November 14th, 2020. I look forward to Mayor Giuliani spearheading the legal effort to defend our right to a free and fair elections. And then he lists members part of the team, like Joseph Giuliani. And if you look through the name, there's Sidney Powell. She was a member of his team to defend this issue. A truly great team added to our other wonderful lawyers and representatives. So you look at this is like the core legal team to fight the election fraud case in the United States. And then it turned out Sidney Powell, she made the news because she said she had this groundbreaking revelation. She discovered this huge conspiracy in regards to software called Dominion software. That's how some of the votes were tabulated. And she said she had evidence that millions of Trump votes that went to Trump were switched to Biden, and she can prove it. And if so, this was a huge national scandal. I mean, something like this. Beforehand, the charges of fraud, which, by the way, I agree with. I think this election was based on fraud. They stopped the voting at 3 a.m., and then they brought in all these mysterious mail-in ballots that were all for Biden. That's probably where the fraud was, and that's what we always thought in these key battleground states. Not the whole country, just these key battleground states. Because if you're going to do a fraud, that's what you do. You target the close states. You don't bother to do fraud in Arkansas because you know Arkansas is going to Trump anyway. It'd be too great of an effort. So that was the idea beforehand. But all of a sudden, we had this huge new revelation, and she called it like the Kraken. We're going to release the Kraken, this monster that's going to destroy everything. And it really would. And she put together this map that I take a look at this map. I find it really fascinating. And this is, according to her, what the real results were if you take out the cheating from Dominion software. So Dominion software didn't cause fraud just like in Pennsylvania or Michigan or Wisconsin, those key states that have been debated. No. Look at California's red. Hawaii, that's down below there. Red. Rhode Island, red. This is amazing, because if you guys don't live in the United States, California now is a one-party state. It's just pure Democrats. The Republicans have like zero control in California. And
pizza delivery 50-year-old incel says that PhD in political science requires no academic rigor. So if you have to learn a foreign language, if you have to meet certain requirements to get into an elite school to do a PhD in political science, typically it takes 7 years to get through the PhD program at the University of California at Berkeley program. 7 years. I think that's the average to get through is PhD program. So you think that's just all fluff and blowjobs and giggles when you say they can't even add? Well, fast growing sector of political science is heavily mathematized. I would suspect the average person doing statistical analysis in political science has far exceeded your own abilities in mathematics. So once again, you simply don't know what you're talking about, which is why you are so glib. It's very easy to be glib when you don't know anything.
Whites are no longer the majority in California. So the idea that California would go to Trump is just astounding. Same with Hawaii. Whites are in a very small minority. It's a strong Democratic state. Rhode Island. So this idea that really secretly all these people voted for Trump, so much so that they won the state, and there's Dominion software that changed it. It was like, wow, that's just groundbreaking. That's amazing. And so Tucker Carlson, who's always been, I think, one of the most level-headed guys that has supported the Trump administration. He's a journalist, but he's, rumor has it, he talked Trump out of going to war with Syria. You remember that? Even Trump said he watched Tucker. So people watch Tucker, and everyone's how based he is. He tells the truth. I like Tucker. So Tucker has Sidney Powell on saying, this is an amazing story. Can you show us information? You can have as much time as you need because this is probably the greatest crime in American history. Please lay this out for us. You have the forum. And she got mad because she didn't have any evidence she wanted to share. And he's like, well, this is an incredible claim. If you have an incredible claim, you better have the evidence. And so nothing happened. So everyone jumped.
Okay, so my interlocutor in the chat says I got an undergraduate degree in math, and as evidence, he says he took several levels of calculus and linear algebra. Those are all elementary classes that anyone who's going to pursue graduate economic studies has to take. So there's nothing in that indicates you actually have an undergraduate degree in mathematics, right? That's all lower division work. So I'm just suspicious of your claims. You claim to have an undergraduate degree in math, and then your evidence for that is that you took these lower division math classes that anyone, for example, is going to pursue any graduate study in, say, economics or in any statistical-based, numbers-based form of political science. They'd be doing that as a freshman or a sophomore. So I see you've taken some freshman mathematics. Congratulations.
Jump on Tucker. They called him a cuck. Fox News was pressuring him. He only cares about money. Maybe he's a CIA operative. All these just ridiculous things. And I saw the Tucker clip, and I was like, because of all these bad things I heard, I was expecting him to be horrible, but he seemed really reasonable.
So the chat says differential equations is lower division. Yes. He studied differential equations in community college, bro. Come on, man. Come on, man. Cut out the malarkey.
To me, he's like, I'm not saying you're lying. He said, we're just...
I mean, look, maybe at your state school, this was considered, upper division. I mean, did you go to the University of Phoenix? I mean, come on, man. You're talking to someone who went to UCLA. Don't try to snow me, bro. Come on, man. Cut out the malarkey.
See the information. And then I heard, well, she can't give the information because that would blow the strategy of the court case because the Democrats would have this. And, well, number one, when you go to court, you have to do depositions before it goes to court. So the other side gets to see your evidence before it's presented in court. So they would know it anyway. And, okay, I understand you don't want to try it in the media, but she was already making these wild claims about biblical fraud, release the Kraken, she released this map. So she's already making these wild claims in the media.
Okay, Isaiah, who I always spar with, but I love his perspectives, and I'm really happy he is here today. He writes in the chat, post-2016, the left has laid out a new level of game, a new level of any means necessary ethics. Guess what? Pretty much everybody has, by any means, ethics when it is restricted by any means that they can, one, get away with, and two, they can maintain their sense of self that they're still basically a good person. So I don't think the left is any more ruthless or unethical than the right.
But then, oh, no, I can't reveal the evidence. And it's just like, it seems kind of dicey to me. That's just my opinion. And I gave my opinion on that. And like Tucker, people, oh, you're just a cock, boomer. I bet you're paid by the CIA. You're a shill. And I'm like, no, I'm just a little suspicious. That's all. Because this is a wild claim that Trump really won California and Hawaii. It's like, ooh, that's pretty wild. And there's no evidence. And with this Dominion software, and I don't think it's unreasonable to be skeptical, at least until we see it. But anyway, that was the case. Everyone was calling me a black pillar and all that. And then just yesterday, okay, this is real, November 22nd, Trump can't.
Okay, so... the chat says, bro, I went to a higher ranked place for a master's than UCLA. So UCLA, according to U.S. News and World Report, is the top ranked public university in the nation. So you want me to believe that you who thinks that differential equations and linear algebra is some, incredibly, challenging upper division form of mathematics, but you went to some elite school for your double major in math and chemistry. Okay, count me skeptical.
Campaign statement on legal team. Sidney Powell is a practicing law on her own. She's not a member of the Trump legal team. She's also not a lawyer for the president in his personal capacity. And just 9 days prior, remember, Trump tweeted that she was part of his team. And I think this is, well, what's the deal? Is Trump blackpilling? Are you going to call Trump a shill, a part of the plot? So
I passed one semester of calculus. I took it at community college. And then I started taking a second quarter calculus at UCLA, but I got really sick, so I dropped out. But I would talk to people who studied mathematics, get a little bit of a handle on where the next semesters of calculus would go, linear algebra. It's just these are just logical developments upon studying some calculus. Differential equations, again, it's not like some quantum leap from, say, first semester calculus. These are all things that someone who has passed, one semester of calculus can get their head around. These are not upper division forms of mathematics, bro. You study differential equations, you study second year calculus, you can study that at a community college. Come on, man, cut out the malarkey.
What are you going to do? Because now Trump is basically distancing himself from Sidney. And you could try to spin it, oh, well, she was never part of the team. Well, he claimed 9 days ago she was part of the team, and now they're putting out a press release saying, no, she has nothing to do with it. She's just working on her own. So what's up with that? And I heard all these, conspiracy, this 4D chess, oh, well, see, this way it gives her more power because she doesn't have to vet everything through the Trump team, so this is strategic. And it's like, well, okay, Trump's always on Twitter, and he's always following these things, so I would expect him to clarify the matter and say, you guys, you're right. I still love what Sidney Powell's doing, but she's not officially part of her team. She's on her own, but I'm 100% behind her. You would think with all this controversy, this is huge controversy. He watches Tucker. He's on Twitter. He sees all these people. You would think he would say that, right? No, he says nothing about it. Totally radio silence about the issue. So this is really a problem now. And because all these people have bought into this whole idea that there's a secret evidence that's going to overturn everything, and that Trump on January 20th will be inaugurated again for a second term. And I'm skeptical. I've always been skeptical. And what's really bad is now because of this wild accusations, if these wild accusations by Sidney Powell prove to be false, in the court of public opinion, they're going to say, oh, well, the whole thing is nonsense. The whole election fraud is a bunch of Q conspiracy people.
Okay, what is the Release the Kraken meme? Release the Kraken is a catchphrase and image macro series based on a memorable quote uttered by Zeus in the 1981 fantasy adventure film The Clash of the Titans, as well as the 2010 3D remake, according to knowyourmeme.com. Despite the dramatic delivery of the line in the reboot, the quote was perceived as unintentionally funny and quickly became a target of image macro jokes on the web. The 3D reboot came out in 2010.
Have you seen what's happening out there? Have you even bothered to look?
They need to be reminded of the order of things. Turn them on each other.
Okay, that's a little bit here on Release the Kraken.
People that have lost touch with reality, and they'll forget it. And you can say, who cares about public perceptions? But you have to understand the courts. They're not this. I know theoretically they're supposed to be neutral and not subject to public pressure, but they are. They do consider that. So if like the majority of people thinks this is all nonsense now because of Sidney Powell's claims, if they prove to be false, which I think they are, it damages the whole credibility of the movement to say stop the steal. And there was election fraud with the mail-in ballots, and we can have evidence. That's the problem. And I've seen that before. I saw that before politically with the old alt-right. When the old alt-right was started, it was really a broad movement. It wasn't about white nationalism or neo-Nazism or anything like that. It was more closely related to paleo-conservative that most people could get behind. It really made a lot of sense. It was kind of close to the MAGA movement. And you had a really broad tent of people. And then all of a sudden, and I won't say who, but you guys know who, these guys that ran neo-Nazi sites with swastikas, the whole bit, they said, no. The alt-right, no, alt-right's all about Nazism and white nationalism. And it went into that direction, and they were able to co-opt the movement. So at that point, no one wants to be associated with Nazism and that type of stuff. So the whole thing just crumbled. All the support for the alt-right crumbled, and you just had this hardcore weirdos that no one wanted to support. And now it doesn't exist, I don't think. There's no such thing as the alt-right because of that mistake. And I've seen a similar thing now with this whole MAGA and Stop the Steal. Yeah, this is a great thing. I think if you look at the data, it's very fishy, the numbers, a lot of red flags, how all the voting was frozen in key battleground states, and you have these mail-in ballots. That's probably where the effort should be. That's legitimate. And that's what we should be focusing on. But all of a sudden, out of left field, you have Sidney Powell make this wild claim about millions of votes being changed. It would even flip California and Hawaii. And then pretty soon, someone like Tucker's like, I'm kind of skeptical of this. And then you could call Tucker a cuck and black pillar, and you could call me the same. But Trump, obviously, my guess, he called Sidney in his office, said, what's the deal? Do you have evidence? And based on what happened, I mean, he kicked her off. He's no longer part of the team. She's no longer part of the team. And he's not putting out statements supporting her. So all you people out there that are still hanging on her every word, I mean, you're going to be made to look foolish. And in doing so, you sort of discredit the real election fraud that happened. And that's a shame. And that's why we always have to have, I think, sober-minded men looking at these issues and not get hysterical. And when you get some like hysterical claim that just doesn't even sound right, you got to put the brakes on. You just can't accept it because you want it to be true. Like, yeah, I bet Trump won 50 states, all the states. Yeah, that'd be nice, but that's not really realistic if you understand how the states are in the populations. And you need someone to say, wait a minute, that sounds kind of fishy. And then you need to look at the evidence. But a lot of us didn't do that on the MAGA side. And they believed into the Sidney Powell. They believed into this 4D chess. They believed in this whole, the Kraken's going to be released any day now. And some of these people that keep doubling down. And I don't know, what are they going to do on January 20th when Biden is inaugurated as president? How are they going to rationalize it? Are they going to blame me and Tucker for blackpilling? Or they're going to realize that, man, all the stuff I believed in was false. There wasn't this massive stuff. And so this is why it's so key, and it's frustrating because everyone says I'm pessimistic. I'm not pessimistic. I'm optimistic. I don't never saw Trump as like the key to our salvation. He was a tool. He was useful. I really appreciate all he did, and I supported him. But I don't see him as like this cult leader that's going to bring everything into fruition. He was a necessary step, and we need to build for that. We just can't get hung up on Trump and think everything's about Trump and that he's the God Emperor. I mean, that was a funny meme, but some people I really think started to think that literally, and they have all these fantasies now how he's going to be a new Caesar and get the military, he's going to be like a Caesar or something, and dissolve the Senate. It's not going to happen, guys. We got to be in reality and look at what's real and not get into these fantasies. These fantasies, they're not helpful. And you're not being blackpilling or you're not being pessimistic if you're skeptical of these wild fantasies. In fact, believing in these wild fantasies can be more harmful because when they don't come true, they just disillusion a lot of people because then they think it's all bullshit. It's kind of like the Christians that believe in the rapture and they always pick dates for the rapture and everyone gets excited and then the date comes and goes and nothing happens. Some people then don't believe in any of they throw it all away. They dump Christianity because they say, hey, this is false. I mean, these guys, I really believed in it. They said this is the day Jesus would come. It didn't come. I guess it's all nonsense then. And that's not the case. I'm a Christian and I realize to separate things that are like heresies, and we need to do the same thing politically. It's like just because you believe in election fraud, which I do, I think there's good evidence, doesn't mean you have to believe.
Okay, I wonder what Millennial Woes is thinking these
people
days.
Don't appreciate them because we only appreciate what we can measure and what is, what can be measured in numbers and amounts and in quantities. And so we only have economy. Economy is the only thing we have left. People measure happiness in economy. I mean, it's insane. But the problem is that when these people are not financially successful, well, what can you do? That's why you get the thing that they call in Japan hikikomori, with this sort of where you're just alone and you live in your mom's basement and you don't do anything. I mean, it's because if you're not financially successful, if you have like very high demands on yourself, that you have very high ambitions, and if you fail, then you get a sort of social anxiety. I think that is a big part of the problem, that we're not a part of anything organic, natural anymore.
Oh yeah. I mean, I remember 2 videos I did in my.
Well, people who are part of a profession are part of something that's organic. People who are part of an ethnic community, part of something that is organic. People that are a part of a religious community are part of something that's organic. People who are liked and respected in their community are part of something organic. You know who's not part of something organic? People who are incredibly self-destructive. Like, hate to pick on him, but Millennial Woes here, incredibly self-destructive, sex pest behavior. You're not going to be a part of an organic community if you engage in that sort of behavior. If in a first world Western country you push a 1488 ideology, you're not going to be part of something that's organic. So guess what? Most people are part of something that's organic. They have family, they have friends, they have religious community, they may well have ethnic community, they may well be part of an educational and professional community. So an organic life is out there. The more important question is what prevents one from leading a life that is not part of something greater than oneself. And that is overwhelmingly self-destruction, an inability to maintain connections with other people, an inability to be at ease with yourself. And maybe much of this depends on dealing with your back pain, bros. Right? Come on, man. Have you been saved by
It turned out
John
that
Sarno?
it was my mom calling an ambulance. My dad had an ulcer, and that morning he was really sick and losing a lot of blood. My mom was panicking. My twin brother and I somehow got ourselves ready for school, and we headed for the bus. I do recall that as my brother and I walked to the bus stop, we saw an ambulance pull into the wrong driveway, and we had to point them in the right direction. I think my father was in the hospital for about a week, and shortly after he recovered, he began to have a series of pain problems that plagued him for years. My parents never talked to me too much about their childhoods, and I don't have the clearest memories of my own. But when I started to get back pain, I paid attention to both Billy Wilder and Dr. Sarno in order to change the direction of my story.
And what? Did you repeat what I...
do that again. Yeah.
Just what I just said?
Yeah, you did it great, but you can always do better.
Okay, we're talking about an epidemic of pain. These pains are not the result of some disease process, but rather the result of the stresses and strains of life. The residual child exists in every one of us. And by putting ourselves under pressure and by circumstances in life putting us under pressure, that residual child is getting very, very angry. And that literally is the source of this pain.
Okay, that's the late Dr. John Sarno, author of various books on healing back pain. So my interlocutor in the chat says, bro, I went to a school higher ranked than UCLA. And then he sends me links to U.S. News, best colleges, best national universities. Bro, this is based on undergraduate education. Okay, this is not based on graduate education. Now, these are fine universities. For undergraduate education, UCLA is about a top 20 school, probably the best public university in the nation. But when it comes to graduate school, UCLA has long been in the top 10, maybe even the top 5 or 6. So come on, man.
Once you are aware of the nature of this, then it ceases to exist, which is really a wonderful thing to think about. It's knowledge that is the cure here. Knowledge is the only prescription that I have and that I give to patients. I tell them what's going on, and wow, lo and behold, it stops hurting.
When the pressures that I put myself under caught up with me, I got slammed to my office floor in incredible pain, and I couldn't move for weeks. I had a lot of time to think.
Really tangled. Woo.
I thought about how the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves shape our sense of who we are. The writer Thomas Wolfe famously wrote, "You can't go home again." But a couple of years ago, when my mom moved out of the house that I grew up in, my partner Suki and I did just that. We moved with our kids back into my childhood home.
So this is the new documentary, All the Rage Saved by Sarno. And here's Millenial
I think in my
Woes.
first year, 2014, failure to launch, which was an expression that was being used at that point, and also six capable boys. I was talking about my social circle at school. And yeah, I think that those are relevant to what you just said. There is this general
failure to launch. Why do people have a failure to launch? Because they're not at ease with themselves or with other people. If you're able to pick up social cues, if you have relationships, if you have friendships, if you're able to belong to groups and hang out with groups, you will get the cues and you will launch. But if you are ill at ease with yourself and you don't get along with other people, and you basically have, through no fault of your own necessarily, an antisocial addiction, then you're not going to launch. So failure to launch or launching, these are all manifestations of something that's deeper and more internal. These are just symptoms. Failure to launch is not the cause of unhappiness. It is a reflection of an unhappy approach to life.
You're right that people are judged economically, and everything is economics now in a completely ruthless way, very cold.
Guess what? Life has always been fairly ruthless, and your economic status has always mattered. It's not that economic status matters more now, or that we've become more ruthless now. It's the nature of reality. People who have a hard time dealing with reality bemoan reality and say, oh, we've just become so money obsessed now. Society, it's become ruthless, and our youth now has a failure to launch due to these socioeconomic and national trade policy reasons. No. If you fail to launch, it's because of you, right? If you're not able to get along with other people, it's because of you. If you live in your parents' basement and you have an IQ over 100 and you're, say, above 25 years of age, that's because of you. I'm not saying you're inherently a bad person. I'm saying that you have certain things going on with you that prevent you from flourishing. And the problem's inside of you. The problem is not external to you.
But also, men are, I think, given to judge themselves on their achievements. And, you know, all this sort of lovey-dovey stuff about you're a good person and you can do this and that, and you know that your intentions are benign and help, and you want to help other people and so on. That's all very well, but it doesn't actually mean anything. You know, the young man who's achieved nothing knows deep down that he has achieved nothing. And when other people see him on the street, he's terrified of what they're thinking of him, because he knows that he thinks badly of himself. He knows that he thinks he's a fucking loser. So why shouldn't everyone else think the same thing? And how soon will it be before that person...
Okay, there are plenty of people out there who don't think of themselves as effing losers, even though they don't make money. They're strong, confident people who are pursuing their dreams. They may be playwrights, or they may be pursuing acting. If you have friends, if you have family, if you have community, you're not beating yourself down because you're not earning X amount of money. But if you fundamentally hate yourself, like Millenial Woes seems to do, then you're going to see the world through the lens of who you are, through your own depression. So what Millenial Woes is talking about is his own inner world, and how he believes that his own inner world of tremendous depression reflects what's going on in society.
Person on the bus realizes that he is a loser, sees him for what he is. I remember feeling like that. And I know that the only way that it ever goes away is once you achieve things. And then it goes.
the reason you feel like that is because of things that happened in your childhood combined with your own genetics. It's not because of politics.
Goes away quite effortlessly, quite naturally. But until then, you're basically sort of deluding yourself that, no, I am a good person. And no, I am intelligent. I am capable. I'm sure I am. I did well at that test at school. I used to always...
So if this feeling of worthlessness has gone away for Millenial Woes, then he's not in reality. All right? He hasn't built a life that is going to lead to organic connection to people around him.
Do well with that. That teacher always said this nice thing about me. Yeah, that's all true, but that's not enough to make you feel good about yourself. And that is a cope when you remind yourself of these things from childhood. And you see this, like the guys in Washington in the film, I think it's two guys, Viddy and Charles. You see this with them, that they're obviously clever. They obviously grew up thinking, doing quite well at school and whatever, and thinking that it would be easy. And I think this was something that definitely affected the millennial generation. I imagine it affects the Zoomer generation as well, where basically you grew up thinking that you would have social status similar to your parents, or even better than them, because we've got used to one generation after another being more economically successful and more professionally successful and more educated than their parents, than the generation before it. So we just naturally assumed that, this is how life is, but actually it's not how life is. And now we find ourselves in this jungle, but there's no one telling you how to navigate it. It's terrible, really.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what else to say. I know it's, on the one hand, people will want us to talk about how bad the situation is, but by doing that, we're contributing. I'm aware that by doing that, we're contributing to the whole malaise. But then there's also this pressure to come up with solutions, but there are few solutions. I mean, this is something that is going to take a lot of not just thought, but also social change before it gets better. And so if we pretend to have solutions, that's a pretense. I don't think that we should lie to people about this. But I do think that there are things that each individual can do on an individual level. I think that people should be they should actually be quite ruthless. They should be quite selfish because, again, I think that young men need to understand to some extent, you really are on your own. And to some extent, if you don't do stuff, you are going to be a failure forever. You are going to be a loser forever. It really is in your hands. But that's not a bad thing. That's not the end of the world. It's the start of your recovery. Is realizing that you're the one in charge here. Now, obviously, there are forces arranged against you that are very powerful. But again, think of our ancestors in caveman times and whatever. They had forces ranged against them, but they succeeded.
Yeah. Let's say something about the film itself and the characters. The portrayals of the people. Of course, there's one person who many people will recognize, and that's Kantbot, who made a very popular film, a video. He was in a video where he said that that he believes in Atlantis and Thule and the raising of Atlantis, lowering the sea levels. That was in 2016, and he's one of the guys in the documentary. But what do you think about how these guys are portrayed? Do you think it's a fair documentary? Should we say something about the documentary itself?
Well, we would need to know what was left out, what was left on the cutting room floor. But to me, it seemed quite sympathetic. Yeah. I don't think that they were portrayed badly. It didn't feel like a hit piece. It didn't feel like some Vice documentary about the threat from incels or some rubbish like that. It did seem actually that it was actually interested in finding out what was wrong with these guys. Why are they posting misogynistic hate messages on Twitter and so on? What is behind that? It seemed to be genuinely curious about that, and it didn't seem to be trying to make them look dreadful.
Right. No, and also I think it's good that this problem or this situation, this development is highlighted, because there is a discrepancy between the public narrative of how everything is just getting better and better all the time, and the reality where things are where you just feel more and more despair all the time. And I mean, I think that this young generation of I don't know what, transgender and all these kinds of things, it's a symptom of a lot of people just being alienated and trying different solutions to sort of deal with their problems, right? So I mean, all these things that are celebrated out in public, they're just a source of a lot of suffering in reality. And I think that it's a good thing that it's highlighted throughout the film, that this is a development that no one is really happy in this situation.
Well, yeah, I mean, you see the guy, I think it jumps ahead 2 years towards the end, about 20-30 minutes before the end, and one of the guys is now doing a lot of working out. He's going to the gym every day, and he's got a job. Mm-hmm. He mentions he's got a job. Another one of the guys in Washington has a girlfriend, so he's no longer in the title category. Mm-hmm. And I think something happened with Kantbot, but I actually went to his Twitter and realized that he's been banned from Twitter now. So I don't know if he's going to. So
this is a discussion of the film, that feeling when no girlfriend.
Because that's going to be a lifeline, as it was for me. I don't need to go on about that. Everyone will remember that. Losing these things can be very devastating if it's something that means a lot to you. So it seems like a mixed bag in terms of prospects.
A feeling, I think
that
girlfriend documentary
came across well to me. I thought he seemed very down to earth. and sensible and benign. He didn't seem to revel in nihilism too much, but I haven't seen his online stuff, so I'm not sure. Are you more familiar with him?
I'm not at all. I mean, I've just seen that video that everyone else has seen from 2016, and it's one of the things that he said in the film as well. That, I mean, he was joking around. He was he wasn't being obviously serious. So and then people were disappointed because he wasn't actually quote unquote one of us. And I mean, that's just the name of the game. That's how it works. I mean, people will joke about things sometimes, and then there's nothing to be upset about, you know. And I think that the guy with the cowboy hat, the guy in El Paso in Texas, I just felt a lot of sympathy for his situation. He was drinking all the time, he was smoking all the time, and I just got the impression that you know, where's this going to lead? He seemed like a good guy, but it's like all the other people that the documentary followed, it seemed like they had sort of a way out of this this existential despair. But the guy in Texas, he seemed like he was in a very tough spot.
Yeah, he was in El Paso, and he seemed very burnt out, I thought.
Yeah,
he seemed very, like, you could imagine him just driving a car into a wall one night. Yeah. I hope he doesn't do that, because he did seem to be, he seemed to be a guy who was just looking for something, looking for something to live for, basically.
Yeah.
It's a shame. I mean, I just think it's ironic that we hear so much about white male privilege and all that, and then the reality is that a lot of white males, young guys, are living like this, and it's really, this is the stuff that you just don't. And indeed, they are then demonized in the media as incels and alt-right and whatever. So it's extremely cruel what's happening to them.
One of the scenes that I just found insane in the documentary was when one of the guys.
Okay, I'm arguing about linear algebra with the chat. Yeah, I'm sure there's linear algebra that is upper division, and there's linear algebra that is lower division. There's differential equations classes that are lower division mathematics, and there are differential equations that are upper division mathematics. Right. So just saying that you studied linear algebra and that you studied differential equations, it's not strong evidence that you did a degree in mathematics.
The police came and took his guns away. And then when he talked to, I don't know if it was the police or a lawyer, but he talked to someone on the phone in the legal system, and they asked, "Are you a part of the incel community?" And I was like, what the hell? What does that even mean? Do you have to be successful with women in order to be able to own guns in America? Is that one of the requirements? What does that mean? I mean, that's an insane question. I didn't even know that there was such a thing, that, you know, that this concept had that kind of meaning.
Well, this is all to do with the shifting cultural landscape of the last few years. I mean, the last 5-6 years, the incel thing. I'm not good with the dates on this one for some reason, but I first became aware of it probably in 2018, and I'm sure it predated that.
Okay.
And so once it was one of those things that was used by mainstream media.
Hi, Luke. How are you?
I'm well.
Yes. Did you have a nice day?
I have. What's on your mind this evening?
Well, I was just I didn't drink all week, so that was a positive. But I drank tonight, so I thought I'd ring you up as I had a few beers, so I had the confidence to ring in.
Excellent.
And I was just thinking about the last conversation we had, and just the challenges of trying to build your life when you're a bit older, you know.
Yeah.
And it's really hard. I think very few people really realize what it's like to get to 40 and not to have started life, you know, and how hard it is to build it, you know, from the ground up at an advanced stage.
Yeah, so tell me more.
So I think when you get older, maybe if you've been single for a lot of your life, or you haven't had like a really significant relationship that you thought could lead to like children and a marriage and someone that you stay with for a long time, I think you probably develop like a negative perception of the kind of people you're going to meet as you get older. So it's like everything compounds the older you get. It becomes, it's not as easy as like some people would say, why don't you just go out and, you know, meet the first woman you can and wife her up and all this. But it's just not as simple as that as you get older, because you have a lot more life experience, you know, like maybe when you're 20 or you're very young, you don't know, and you could meet the first woman you bump into and you could have children with her. But when you're older, you see a lot of people that have got divorced and they're in bad situations, and so you're trying to avoid that as well. And maybe you can become too careful as you get older, and you're unwilling to take chances.
Yeah, I think dating is one of those rare things in life where you get worse at the more you do it. Like if you're still dating in your 40s and your 50s, I mean, it's much, much more difficult than dating in your teens.
Right. And so what are the Luke Ford red flags? What would you say your red flags are when you meet a woman?
Oh, okay. Red flag. Any woman who is worse at noticing social cues than I am, that's a huge red flag. So I can only think of one girlfriend I had who was worse at reading social cues than I was. And she was semi-homeless when I met her. She wasn't living on the streets, but she was living on her sister's couch, and she was sleeping often in the office of the Los Angeles Press Club where she had a volunteer job. So that was a red flag. She talked about how she'd been semi-homeless for a couple of years due to health issues, which was a nice way of saying that she'd been incredibly depressed. So those were red flags. Inability to hold down a job, I'd say that's a red flag. And if she's ridden the cock carousel, like any woman who's, say, been with more than half a dozen guys, that if she's had sex with more than half a dozen guys, she's a poor risk for a future wife and mother.
But that's incredibly difficult, because I can't imagine a woman that hasn't been with half a dozen guys at 30 years old,
I would suspect that probably half the women who are in their 30s have not been with half a dozen guys, but I'm not sure. I'm not saying that this would automatically rule someone out, but in my experience, the more lovers that a woman has had, the more mentally ill she is, because it's strongly against a woman's self-interest, self-respect, and social standing to have a long parade of lovers.
So if I'm right, you're kind of looking for a woman that is all set up in life, that has a job, is somewhat intellectual. So it would maybe be a divorcee or something like that.
Yeah. So my choices are heavily narrowed. I mean, I can only essentially date, relate, and mate with someone who's an Orthodox Jew. So someone who didn't have friends, that would not be someone that I would want to get with. That's a huge red flag. If she lacks friends, if she doesn't get along with her family, that would be a huge red flag. Now, it may be possible that her family is insane, but generally speaking, in my experience, women from a divorced home, if her parents divorced, then she's much less likely to be stable, in my experience. So I'd much prefer a woman not coming from a divorced home, who doesn't hate her family, who has friends, who's in a stable relationship with the wider Orthodox Jewish community. And I would not want someone with a lot of credit card debt. I'd want someone who is essentially self-supporting.
And how do you rate your chances of finding this person?
I would say they're fair.
Right. Okay. I mean, me personally, I think my chances are about 0. I really feel like I'm in a real uphill struggle. It would just be a nightmare to know where to begin and to meet someone that you could, build a life with. I think that would be a really daunting thing. 40, personally.
Right, because Look, I don't know you. I just had one previous conversation and some interactions on the chat, but there's not really, no sane woman is going to date you given the place that you're in right now. I mean, you could transform yourself, but given your life situation right now, no sane woman is going to date you. Babylonian Hebrew is also joining the show. Babs, what's going on?
The only people you can mate and relate with are Orthodox Jews. Is that really the case, Luke?
Yeah, that's the emes, my friend. That's the divine Torah-based truth.
So, like, why don't you like settle a little bit, right? Like, you sound like maybe I was hearing in the wrong context because I just like flicked onto your show. I was like, oh, Luke Ford's on, and I heard you. It sounded like one of those like women on the internet who's like, he has to be like at least 6'2" and have a good job and and be sweet and emotionally intelligent and like you were just why haven't you you're a good looking intelligent man, and despite your eccentricities, like if you were to just I'm sure that there were many points in time when you could have like married and settled down and had a like stable, healthy situation. Like what is it that prevented from you?
Luke, is it like Babs? It's okay.
High standards or what?
If there's a space for me to talk.
Yeah. So unfortunately, due to my technological setup, Lucy, the Dino girl, can't hear Babs. But why haven't I married? It's a good question. So there's got to be some OPSEC too here, Babs. Like I'm saying these things publicly. So I had not deeply considered the topic of red flags and what I'm looking for. These were just some general guidelines. So I'm generally fairly free in sharing about my life, but there does need to be some discretion as well. So why have I not married? I've had the opportunity to marry, but let me reflect a little more on what you're saying. So I'd say a big factor would be that I had under-earning problems until maybe about 3 years ago. So that was reducing my chances for settling down with someone who was substantial. And I think I was pretty much an untreated sex and love addict until about 8 years ago. So any woman who would have had a relationship with me until I got sober and with my sex addiction and my love addiction and my porn addiction would have been mentally ill. And any woman who would have formed a relationship with me while I was still chronically under-earning would also have been pretty ill herself.
Yeah, yes, that's true. But that's kind of the point. Like, that's generally the way the game works. It's like, a man who's kind of like, interesting and worldly and cultured and good looking, but also like mentally ill and has like serious like interpersonal relationship problems and psychological issues. Or isn't earning enough money. Like, that's the thing. It's like you're supposed to find someone who's also might be like good looking but mentally ill, or maybe someone who's kind of plain but is stable and provides you that stability. Like that's how it's supposed to be. You're not supposed to this idea of like constantly needing to improve yourself to access the better person. Like, this is just the height of like modern age like BS in the dating field, I feel like, and marriage field.
Right, but let's just say someone's an alcoholic. No sane woman is going to marry an alcoholic.
But can I?
Yes, go ahead.
Say,
exactly. So it's
like
a
lot of it comes down to if you're physically attractive,
or you get the same woman, but like she's
if you're sexy,
she might be like so like low status and
then
marginalized for whatever reason that she's forced into the position of like compromising for this alcoholic. Imagine the alcoholic
and they will
is like some
have children with
hotshot celebrity. Or imagine the alcoholic is John McAfee, right?
If you're
the woman,
hang on, Dino.
The woman might. Just be like, oh wow, well that's John McAfee. Because I am like nothing, and compared to John McAfee, I'll end up with the alcoholic. We all make compromises. That's the thing. It's just and like the whole idea of like people get stuck perfecting themselves their whole lives. I think it seems like it would just be better if people could just be like, all right, like let's let's aim for the best I can get with the present situation. I mean, I don't know. What are your thoughts on settling, basically, and the whole concept? I think the whole thing is nonsense. You know, the whole idea, these absurdly high standards that are forced into people. You know, it used to be the only people you even had available to marry or date or fornicate with is like, like the 30 other people in your like goat herding village in Ford Town or whatever. Like times have changed, man, and our psychologies can't keep up with it.
Well, I'm a failure here. You know, I've never married. I've never sustained a relationship longer than a year. So I'm probably the very worst person to talk about on these topics because I have a track record of nothing but failure. I've had, I don't know, half a dozen relationships or so that have lasted about a year. And I've dated, well over 100 women. So I'm just have a long track record of failure. So settling, yeah. You don't want to settle with someone who's an axe murderer. You don't want to settle with someone who's a drug addict or an alcoholic. But there are other addictions that may not be as hardcore that you can work with. So it is not good for man to be alone. So yes, I believe that having a sense of reality and pairing up with someone and building a life together is a very good thing. Now, if you're incredibly dysfunctional, then I believe that you need to get, functional before you pair up, because you are only going to be able to pair up with someone who's similarly dysfunctional.
Even a lot of the functional people who try to get functional don't get functional. What do you think? What do you think should be done with these people? Do you think that? Hold on one second.
Okay, Dino, I'm sorry I cut you off there. Dino, why don't you go ahead with your thoughts? Dino, are you still there?
Hello. Yes, I'm still here.
I apologize. I cut you off. Why don't you go ahead and repeat your thoughts from 5 minutes ago?
What I was going to say is that if you're physically attractive to women, they will have a relationship with you, even if you're older. If they find you attractive, they're willing to overlook things, like maybe your financial situation isn't very good, or, if they find you physically appealing, I think that's the primarily most important thing to them,
Yeah. And so what are the women that give you the time of day, Dino?
I actually, because I say I look pretty good for my age. I'm about 40, and I've had women that are maybe, in their 40s that have been interested in me, but I wasn't really interested in them. I felt like the women that I've had interested in me, they've had their life, and I haven't. I haven't done all the things. They probably got grown-up children and that, and I'd like to start fresh with someone if I was going to do it. That's just how I feel. I don't feel like doing it with someone that's already done it all before.
Yeah, I think that our chances at romantic relationships and getting married, that they largely mirror our standing in community and with other people. So people who are loners are very poor chances of getting matched. But if you have friends, if you have community that you're a part of, then you're much more likely to be able to get along with someone well enough to build a relationship and to get married. So I think that one's ability to have that romantic sexual relationship is largely a reflection of your ability to get along with others. Like people who get divorced generally come from parents who got divorced, and they're probably low in the personality trait of agreeableness, while people who are able to maintain friendships, maintain their standing in a community, able to get along with other people, by definition, they're going to be high in agreeableness, and they're going to be much more likely to be able to sustain a relationship.
Yes, I think But one thing I'd say is I think a lot of the world we live in nowadays, it's more about creating the first impressions, you know. So maybe you're really good at long-term things, but if you're not good at that first impression, then you're going to be overlooked. It's going to be really hard, you know. And maybe if you come with baggage and they're going to judge you on that baggage, and that's going to stop them from giving you the opportunity in the first place, you know.
Yeah. So I think for, say, someone in your position, I don't know you personally, but for someone in your position, if you had an honored place in the community, let's say that you were doing important volunteer work, that you were important in the lives of people in your community, then people would be much more likely to match you up. So the more connected you are, the easier it is to connect. The more disconnected you are, the more difficult it is to connect. So when I've made friends in, say, my Orthodox Jewish community, then as people get to know me, then they'll want to connect me. But if I'm not having Shabbat meals at their homes, if I'm not davening with them at shul, if I'm not a part of the community, if I'm not contributing to the community, then they're going to be less likely to know me, and they're going to be less likely to want to connect me to, say, some woman who's looking for a shidduch, who's looking for a match. So it's everything good in life almost comes to us through other people. It comes to us as a result of our connections with others.
Yeah, I do agree with that. I do, but I would say this, Luke. Me and you, I know you could say, you know, you're in a better place or whatever. But the fact is, we're both in the same place. We're both single men in advanced years, and I know what you're saying, and logically it makes sense, but it hasn't borne results for you yet. So you're still in the same place as I am, if you understand.
Yeah, and it has nothing to do with being in necessarily a better or worse place. You know, in some ways, like I'm the guy who directed a porn movie. I'm a guy who wrote about the porn industry for 10 years. So you could do an absolute accurate presentation of my life, and you'd present someone who's the biggest loser of all time. And at the same time, someone could do an absolutely accurate presentation of your life and present you as a heroic character. So there's an enormous amount of subjectivity in you know, who's up and who's down, and things change from day to day.
But so what is the kind of person you see yourself meeting, like personality wise? What, like a kind of free spirited person, or?
I've never dated anyone who didn't enjoy reading books. So
right.
I know that may sound weird to people, but even the porn stars that I dated, they enjoyed reading books. And we could sit around talking about books that we read. So I remember one ex-porn star that I dated, her mother was an English teacher. She was a very smart young woman, and she just retired from the porn industry. I think she was only 21. But it was easy to talk to her about books. I remember Kendra Jade, another porn star that I was close to. She loved to read books. So that's one personality trait that I've always found in every woman I've dated. I don't recall ever dating any woman who did not enjoy reading books. I particularly enjoy dating women who I don't have to explain sarcasm to. So many women just absolutely hate sarcasm. But there have been some women that I've dated who I've never had to explain when I was sarcastic. I've never had to explain what I meant. So some women read a lot of different cues. Okay, hang on, Dina. I want to bring back
Just going for a wee.
Babs. Okay. Babs, go ahead.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt, Dina. I just wanted to ask. Someone in the chat says, how much would it take for you to cry on camera, Luke Ford?
Probably $1,000.
All right, and that leads me to thinking, like, you should engage in this. Like, you've already fostered this great kind of like parasocial connection with your audience and chat box, and I feel like it's just the next logical step for you to for you to start like debasing yourself on camera for donations?
Thank you.
Not.
That's,
Yeah. What are your thoughts? Like, how much would it take for you to like eat a raw onion or something? I don't know. Just for instance.
I'd eat a raw onion for the whole thing. I mean,
Yeah, in
one
in one sitting. Well, maybe we could start with something small, like maybe like a few cloves of garlic, raw.
Yeah, I'd eat a few cloves of garlic raw for $1,000.
$1,000.
Mhm.
What about, even though it's like objectively good in their health benefits? Like, are there any? What about like minor indignities? Like, if we want you to put the CPAP mask on, like how much?
Oh, to put the CPAP mask on, I'd do that for 50.
All right. Okay. Good. I don't know. These are just some ideas. I'll let you and Dina get back to your conversation, and while the chat, does their magic.
Okay. Blessings. All right. Okay. Yeah. Dino, are you still
Yeah.
there? Do you want to
Yeah,
carry on?
Yeah. I mean, like, so, what I think is it's ironic because the person you are now and what you're looking for is almost like the person you were before doesn't represent who you are now, and it's like imagine if you went back in time, you could say like it used to be the opposite. So say a woman with a scandalous past, that would be against her, but nowadays it wouldn't matter. People wouldn't care. Whereas ironically, it would kind of be like you as a man that would be judged for your past nowadays. What do you think about that?
Yeah. Obviously, I've got an incredibly scandalous
No,
past
I'm
that would make many women, think twice about dating me. On the other hand, we've got, mores change, and some women find it exciting to go out with someone like me who has a scandalous past. And you also understand that I'm carrying on this conversation publicly, so I'm not going to say everything. And in fact, I may even voluntarily or involuntarily, fudge or lie or distort some things. But, we're just trying to have the most honest conversation possible in public, while also understanding that I have a real life that I conduct off camera. So I'm not going to say everything. But I've got a scandalous past that would repel most women, perhaps, and be, amusing or even interesting to a minority of women.
Do you think that women would see it and they kind of like not take you seriously because of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's kind of hard to take someone seriously who lives in Orthodox Judaism and yet will publicly acknowledge that he once directed a porn film.
Right. But and then the question becomes: is that the woman? If you met a woman, would she be and she was a woman that kind of found it exciting? Well, would that be the kind of woman in herself that wasn't a serious person?
Not necessarily, because I mean there are a lot of Jews who have a tremendous sense of humor, a lot of Orthodox Jews who themselves have been on a journey, and so yeah, obviously, pretty much every woman that I've dated, likes to laugh. So humor means that you deviate from the norm. That's what humor is. That you say or do something that's unexpected. Now, if you deviate too much from the norm, you become scary to people. So I've scared a lot of people. I remember I was at this Friday night Shabbat dinner, met this very attractive, successful young Jewish woman. We were just really hitting it off. She was laughing and everything, but then I went too far and I frightened her. And so I could never reel her back in. I just completely killed my chances. So when you're funny because you kind of violate the rules, or you don't say what's expected. You violate social norms, and that's what makes you funny. But if you go too far in violating social norms, then you become frightening. So if you present my story to some people, they would undoubtedly find it frightening. And then to other people, they would just find it amusing and funny.
How tall are you, Luke?
I am 6 foot.
I mean, you were very good looking you're still good looking now, but when you were young, you were very good looking, weren't you, as well?
Yeah. I mean, I've always been pretty good at initially meeting women. It's just that when they got to know me, that started to have trouble. So I remember Sandra Singh Low was a writing teacher at USC. She was on a local public radio station here in Los Angeles. And about 15 years ago, she had this dinner party, and it was all these unmarried single Jewish women. And it turned out that everyone at her dinner party had dated me, and they all initially found me incredibly appealing. But then once they got to know me, they considered me a horror show.
Oh dear. And yeah, I mean, so you're kind of looking for a 30-year-old woman now, aren't you? Really?
Yeah, a woman in her 30s. I'm not attracted to women my own age. I'm 54, and if I'm going to get married, I'd want to get married to someone that I can have children with. And so women over 40 are rarely fertile.
Would you marry an unattractive woman that was, say, 28, 29, maybe overweight or something like that?
If I found her attractive, so I have relatively generous standards. So, so a woman that you might find unattractive, I might well find attractive.
Right, but I think that the truth is that with most men, we find most women attractive. You know, there's, you know, we go pretty low in our standards. I think, you know, I mean, as I get older, I actually would value probably personality more than just physical attraction. You know.
Yeah, because I mean, you put, you know, less emphasis on looking, you know, prestigious to your friends, that you've got the hot wife. You realize that sex is not going to be the number one thing in your marriage, and yeah, you'll put more emphasis on someone who is just companionable, someone that you just enjoy spending time with. Also, I find all sorts of women that I had no interest in at first, when I simply got to spend time around them, then suddenly propinquity, you know, breeds attraction. If I'm seeing a woman every day, or I'm spending a lot of time around a woman, all sorts of women that I had zero interest in, if I just spend enough time around them, they become attractive to me.
Right. Have you ever met your ideal woman? Like, you know, the woman that you thought that you, like someone that you really got on with and you thought, yeah, that's the person I'd like to get married to and spend my life with, you know?
Possibly, theoretically possible, but I'm not haunted by the one who got away. Like I often ask, you know, have people ask me, you know, was there one in particular who got away? And I could not put my finger on, you know, the one who got away. That there were some women that I wanted to build a life with, and they didn't want to build a life with me. Then there are other girlfriends I had who wanted to build a life with me, and I wanted to cut ties and move on.
Right. So I'd say, in my opinion, I probably never really met a woman or known a woman that I'd, you know, really thought, oh yeah, that's a great person. I'd really want to be with that person. Maybe when I first met them for a short period of time, but over time, when you get to know them a little better, you sort of find out, you know, that it's normally a disappointment, you know, and I think that's more obvious. It's more when you get older. It's like you hit that stage a lot quicker, you know, because you know what to look out for, you know.
Yeah. Is there one in particular who you feel like got away from you?
No, not really, not now. I think the problem is that I think most women are probably fairly similar, but the culture kind of shapes them, you know, because if you went back maybe 200 years or whatever, or to the 50s, every man had a wife and they all stayed together. Everybody got married and they stayed together 50, 60 years, whatever. They all had their diamond wedding anniversary and that. And I think it's the culture that kind of shaped them. And like now in the modern day, I think it would be, I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm just saying it's incredibly difficult to meet one that that is kind of, that breaks the mold, that is unique, you know.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to move on. Do you have any final words?
Yeah, I want to say Lucy's gone to bed now. She's having a lovely sleep. And I recommend anyone, if you're lonely, get a bearded dragon. They're from Australia. And they're wonderful friends. You know, you can have a great life and you can feel complete with a bearded dragon.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Mega blessings to you. And let's cut over to Tucker Carlson.
Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. You've heard a lot over the past few days about the security of our electronic voting machines. And this is a real issue, no matter who raises it or who tries to dismiss it out of hand as a conspiracy theory. Electronic voting is not as secure as traditional hand counting, period. It never will be as secure. Voters can see this because it's obvious and it makes them nervous. And why wouldn't it make them nervous? Our leaders have given us every reason not to trust technology. The people now telling us to stop asking questions about voting machines are the same ones who claimed that our phones weren't listening to us. They lie. We all know that. Other countries understand it. They don't use electronic voting because they know it undermines confidence in democracy. A system cannot function if no one trusts the vote. And that's true here too, as we're finding out. Going forward, we need to find out exactly what happened in this month's presidential election. We need to find out no matter how long it takes the investigation to unfold or how much it costs. And once we get answers from that investigation, we ought to revert immediately to the traditional system of voting, the one that served our democracy for hundreds of years. What we're doing now is not working. That's an understatement. As of tonight, the state of New York still hasn't managed to count the votes in 5 House races thanks to mail-in voting. That's a disaster. Let's stop pretending that it's not. But at the same time, we shouldn't let our focus on voting machines distract us from all that happened earlier this month. The 2020 presidential election was not fair. No honest person would claim that it was fair. On many levels, the system was rigged against one candidate and in favor of another. And it was rigged in ways that were not hidden from view. We all saw it happen. The media openly colluded with the Democratic nominees. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris refused to explain what they would do if they were elected. That's never happened before in any presidential election in American history. But the media allowed them to do it. At the same time, beginning in the spring, Democrats used our public health emergency for nakedly partisan ends. They punished Trump supporters for trying to gather, but they exempted their own activists, rioters and vandals from BLM and Antifa, from the COVID lockdowns entirely. They said this out loud. The restrictions they did enforce crushed America's small businesses, the heart of the Republican Party. And yet they made their own donors fantastically richer. Jeff Bezos alone saw his net worth jump by more than $70 billion during the pandemic. Then Democrats used the coronavirus to change their system of voting. They vastly increased the number of mail-in ballots because they knew their candidates would benefit from less secure voting. And they were right. They used the courts to neutralize the Republican Party's single most effective get-out-the-vote operation, which for generations had been the National Rifle Association. Not enough has been written about this, but anyone on the ground saw it. Thanks to legal harassment from the left, the NRA played a vastly reduced role in this election, and that made a huge difference in swing states like Pennsylvania and others. But above all, Democrats harnessed the power of big tech to win this election. Virtually all news and all information in the English-speaking world travels through a single company, Google. A huge percentage of our political debates take place on Facebook and Twitter. If you use technology to censor the ideas that people are allowed to express online, ultimately you control how the population votes. And that's exactly what they did. They rigged the election in front of all of us, and nobody did anything about it. Dr. Robert Epstein saw this coming. Epstein is one of the world's foremost experts on the effect of big tech on politics. Epstein is not a partisan Trump supporter. In fact, he's a Democrat. But he believes in democracy, and for years he has warned that Silicon Valley could steal this election. This is what he said when we spoke to him about a year ago.
Google and similar companies like Facebook are completely unregulated in the United States, so they can do whatever they please. And if they all work together in 2020 to support the same presidential candidate, which is very likely, and probably it'll be a candidate that I support, by the way, they can shift upwards of 15 million votes with no one knowing that they've been manipulated and without leaving a paper trail for authorities to trace.
Dr. Epstein has tracked the effect he says Google has had on this month's presidential election, and he joins us now to explain what he's found. Doctor, thanks so much for coming on. What effect do you think, have you measured, of big tech on the voting outcome this month?
Well, a couple of things that we've looked at so far. First of all, we had 733 field agents in 3 key swing states this year, Arizona, North Carolina, and Florida. And we preserved more than 500,000 ephemeral experiences. That's a lot. That's about 30 times more data than we got in 2016. And we're finding a couple of things that are pretty clear. Number one is that Google's search results were strongly biased in favor of liberals and Democrats. This was not true on Bing or Yahoo. The bias was being shown to pretty much every demographic group we looked at, including conservatives. So in fact, conservatives got slightly more liberal bias in their search results than liberals did. How do you account for that? And then we also found what seems to be a smoking gun. That is, we found a period of days when the vote reminder on Google's homepage was being sent only to liberals. Not one of our conservative field agents received a vote reminder during those days. The good news is, on that 4th day that we were monitoring, we went public with some of our findings, and Google backed off. They literally shut off that manipulation that night. And so for 4 days before the election, they were showing vote reminders to everyone, finally.
What effect, and we're thankful that you are apparently the only person monitoring this. It controls our Google single-handedly controls our view of the world, and yet no one seems to care. But what do you imagine the effect, what have you measured the effect of this manipulation had on the outcome of the election?
Well, there are multiple manipulations here. We were also monitoring YouTube this time, and Facebook, and Bing, and Yahoo. The bottom line at the moment is that these manipulations, the ones that we've so far quantified, could easily have shifted at least 6 million votes in just one direction. That's the bare minimum at this point that I'm confident of. The maximum, we haven't even begun to estimate that yet because we have so much data to look at.
So that's the margin of the election right there. So you're saying that what you feared could happen may indeed have happened, that the manipulations from one company, Google, may have determined the outcome of the presidential election.
Well, we've been told this for nearly a year by whistleblowers from Google. We've seen it in leaked documents from Google, leaked videos from Google. There's no question that they set about after the 2016 election to make sure that President Trump, whom I do not support, by the way, to make sure that he is not reelected. And the massive amount of data we've collected is consistent with what the whistleblowers and leaks have been telling us for a long time now. So yes, the answer is yes.
So why is this not at the top of the concern of anybody who cares about democracy? Why are we allowing this to happen, do you think?
Unfortunately, the answer is pretty obvious. Google literally buys candidates and politicians, and my colleagues, my fellow academics, are often bought by Google with large grants. So, the fact is that if you're a Democrat or you're a liberal, you like what Google and to some extent these other tech companies are doing. You like it. It's to your advantage. The problem, though, is that we don't know who Google is going to be supporting tomorrow. And in fact, in different countries around the world, they don't necessarily support liberals. In some countries, they support conservatives. In China, they've worked with the Chinese government to help surveil and control the Chinese population.
This is the story right here. Dr. Epstein, I hope that you get the funding that you need to continue this research. I think it's hard to think of anything more important, and I hope that changes are made immediately. Or this is
well, we've moved into Georgia, so we're now monitoring the Georgia runoff. So we're doing our best.
I hope that you will. Thank you. So big tech clearly influenced the outcome in this election. That should be shocking and unacceptable to anyone who believes in democracy or good government, and yet it was essentially celebrated by the national media, which shared the goal of removing Trump from office. Cheryl Atkinson is the author of the book Slanted, How the News Media Taught Us to Love Censorship and Hate Journalism. She joins us tonight. Boy, that title is chilling but true. Cheryl Atkinson, thanks so much for coming on. What effect do you think the tech companies had on this election?
Well, I think it was big. Looking at it in a non-forensic way, Dr. Epstein knows a lot more about all of that than I do. But just looking at the influence that they've had over the past couple of years after a concerted campaign that began in 2016 on the part of political and corporate interests to try to control the internet landscape, the information that we get online. Because these forces knew that once they had largely controlled the terms of how we talk about news stories in news divisions and on TV and on cable news, that there was still this place they saw people were getting unfettered access to off-narrative information, studies maybe they don't want you to see or know about, opinions that maybe they don't want you to have or know about. And so they set out their goals to then move into the internet in a way like we hadn't seen before, in a very overt way in those weeks before the election, in fact, to try to control that information landscape as well.
I don't know how frequently we can sound this alarm. I hope something's done about it soon, but give us an example of what they did in the weeks before the election, if you would.
Well, there are plenty of ways and hidden ways that every day our information is controlled. And it's, for example, Google actually made this announcement when coronavirus hit that they were going to direct searches to the World Health Organization, which in retrospect admitted to WHO it had gotten certain things completely wrong. But that's where we were being directed because of the partnership that they developed, because interests wanted us to go there and believe that. But right before the election, in ways that weren't even partly hidden, I felt like there was a sense of desperation because the tech companies began overtly censoring and taking down accounts rather than just sort of minimizing them or minimizing their reach in ways that couldn't be denied. So look at the New York Post story on Hunter Biden. And the audacity of that, but to not even care in those couple of weeks leading up to the election that we saw exactly what they were doing because they knew there would be no repercussions for that before the election and perhaps none, quite frankly, after the election.
It's absolutely shocking. Do you think that there's any way to rein this in before the next election, even before the runoff in January in Georgia that will determine control of the Congress?
Well, I doubt before the runoff, but if we're looking 4 years down the road, there are a lot of strong technical minds and independent journalism minds and information people who are looking for all kinds of new ways where information can be disseminated without being curated by these self-appointed parties who have their own conflicts of interest, where people won't be deplatformed if they simply share factual information, or, hey, if they want to share information that's not true, but leave it up to you to discern what is and isn't and the research that you want to do, rather than letting these unnamed, faceless people with conflicts of interest do it for you. There's a lot of people searching for ways to do that, and I do think something new will be born of all of this.
Man, it can't come too soon. Cheryl Atkinson, great to see you tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
If you're a Trump voter and you suspect that this election was stolen, was rigged, you're onto something. And it's the tech companies, above all, that did it. Keep that in mind. Up next, banning light bulbs, building solar panels, signing international agreements that destroy American jobs to make people like John Kerry feel virtuous. It seems like something that would happen in 2009.
Stress, tension, unresolved emotions, fight or flight, adrenaline, cortisol. So in either case, there is an activation of the nervous system, which would cause the oxygen deprivation. And when you really analyze stress response in the body, it absolutely affects blood flow. Why? Because when we experience fear, our autonomic nervous system automatically shuts down non-essential functions like digestion, like the immune system, and it shuttles all of the blood flow to the major muscle groups of the body so you can fight or flee, right? So we know that stress absolutely changes the autonomic nervous system, and a number of things happen in that nervous system. So number 3, TMS is a harmless condition caused by my repressed emotions. Yes, we absolutely know that is the case. And the reason we know that is because when we do processes and activities that allow us to access and become safe, feel safe with these repressed emotions, the symptoms and pain can stop. And it works fairly consistently for many, 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 many people. Could be even millions by now. Number 4, the principal emotion is my repressed anger. I believe that is definitely also the case. Somebody said, should I feel my positive emotions? You're not in pain because you're too happy, right? You're probably in pain because you're really pissed off and you've been taught or programmed as a young child that anger doesn't belong. We're not supposed to be angry. I'm a good person. I'm a perfect person, right? I'm a spiritual person. Anger doesn't belong. That's not who I am. I'll never be like my father. I'll never be like my mother, right? So anger is the primary one. Does that mean sadness and grief and shame and guilt are not at play? No. Sarno says the principal emotion is repressed anger. Number 5, TMS only exists to distract my attention from the emotions. I believe that 100%. This is a distraction mechanism. Yes, there is a reaction and an activation in the nervous system, but we know it's a distraction because when we shift our focus to the emotions and actually start looking at what the pain and other symptoms are distracting us from, the pain lets go. So I believe it is a distraction mechanism, which is why I love the term distraction pain. Instead of using a medical term like sciatica, I will say distraction pain down my leg. And there are so many medical terms that sound so scary, and when you look them up, it says there is no cure to this. And boy, that reading that type of stuff and using that medical terminology to describe your symptoms will just kind of really scare you further and keep you further distracted from the emotional world, which is at cause here. So, number 6, since my back or other body part is basically normal, there's nothing to fear. And, I talk about this kind of stuff a lot, that your body's fine. And emotions are also safe. So fear is really driving this whole process. Fear is what's driving the distraction. Fear is what keeps us distracted, right? So your body's normal. There's nothing physical.
And